Chapter 16. Opal looked at the kobold leader's body slumped against the boulder and tilted her head. That one was dangerous. Glad the big snake took him out. If he had won against it, then it might have been better for us to just leave. Rain looked up from where he was shoving the last of a kobold leg down his maw. His teeth crushed its claws and he swallowed and let out a belch. He wiped his mouth. Spicy. Oh, the leader? Yeah, he was pretty impressive. Fire breath is something I would like to avoid, because, you know, flammable fur. He gestured vaguely at his body. Kobolds don't normally breathe fire, that's only the second time I've seen it. I guess he was just an unusual breed of kobold then. The goblin gave him a curious look. Breed? I'm not sure what you mean, kobolds are born all the same, that kobold evolved. Evolved? What is evolved? Said Rain, raising an eyebrow. Gods, your old slave masters really taught you nothing about monsters, huh? It's simple, sometimes something happens that triggers a monster into evolving to a better form. You already met an evolved monster, the overgrown gobbo that my old chief castrated. He was a kind of hobgo, which is a better gobbo. Oh. Wait, hold on, does that mean you could evolve too? Yes. But I don't know what would make that happen. I wouldn't want to chase it either. We used to mock evolution chasers in the tribe. They would all without fail get themselves killed having gotten nothing. Interesting. I wonder if it works like leveling, kill monsters, or maybe in a monster's case kill levelers and then evolve. Opal shrugged. I don't know. I knew of gobbos who had done lots of that but nothing happened. Even my old tribe's chief, he killed tons of things, but he never evolved, which frustrated him, not even the witch gobbo knew why. Well, maybe the chance to evolve is hereditary. It's never had any rhyme or reason that my tribe noticed. I just know that it's rare and always makes a monster stronger. Stronger, oi. That leader kobold looked almost noble fighting that snake, that was more than strength, said Rain, picking a scale from his teeth. It's not like he came here for good reasons, not that kobolds ever do anything good if they can help it. She pointed at the clutch of eggs that had been uncovered during the fight. Kobolds love snake eggs and they take crazy risks to get at them. They must have stumbled upon the snake guarding its nest, and the leader wanted its eggs bad enough that he got himself and every kobold with him killed for his greediness. Rain grinned at that. He did, and now everything is mine. He turned back to the pile of stripped kobold bodies and went back to eating. The delicious spice of the creatures made his mouth water and he eagerly tore into them, bones and all. If he were much larger he would have liked to have eaten them like the snake, but since he was not, he contented himself with taking large bites at a time. Kobold was reaffirming its position near the top of his list. Still, he didn't hesitate to leave a kobold tail to the side. He knew Opal liked them. He was pushing how much he could digest at once, filling his stomach and compressing it down. When he'd first eaten kobold he'd only managed one at a time, now he was taking in 1.5 or more before needing to digest. He liked to push it because more inside of him meant he would grow more in one go. He liked that feeling of growth more than he felt he could describe in words. The pile of 14 kobolds quickly diminished beneath his slavering jaws and endless hunger, and soon he was reaching for the last of them. He pushed himself and managed to stuff inside the last 2 kobolds as one. Opal didn't miss the opportunity and fell to her knees, practically hugging him, her breath coming in little gasps. His toes curled and uncurled and he stretched his arms above his head as his stomach growled and began to shrink down. His body began to grow in mass and height, bones creaking and popping, skin stretching over swelling muscle. He groaned and Opal let out an accidental moan as his stomach vanished and his feet pushed against the sand, his legs growing in length, shifting Opal with them. He'd gained inches from eating the 14 kobolds, far better than any crappy mushrooms. Opal clutched at the fur on his pecs and looked up at him. We're not done yet. Her eyes tracked to the massive body of the snake. Eggs first. I've never had a snake egg before. Go and get them for me. Alright. After a moment to prepare herself she slid from his body and climbed to her feet. She wiped a little drool from her lip with the back of her hand. She busied herself digging out the white eggs from the sand one by one. There were a lot, more than expected, nearly 20 of the things. She pulled them free and slowly lined them up by Rain. Each was roughly the size of a melon and she had to roll them across the sand due to their surprising weight. Rain pulled the first one over as she worked. White, with a hard shell with a little give. He held out a claw and poked a hole in the top, then held it up and let the yellow yolk pour into his mouth. Not awful. Slimy. Kinda tasteless. Rain made a face suddenly recalling the blandness of the mushroom monsters and put the shell down. Opal rolled the last of the eggs over. Let me try and cook one before you eat any more. She swiftly pulled out a pan and dropped an egg into it. She then threw down a root thing she had taken from a mushroom monster as well as some twigs and branches from the bottom of her rucksack as well as fluffy tinder she had taken from a lake reed. She knocked together a flint and steel and the tinder caught and then with a whump so did the mushroom root as it burst into flame and began burning furiously. 10 minutes later she hooked out the egg and rolled it over to Rain. He picked it up, bouncing it from paw to paw due to the heat and then tried to poke a hole in the top. He managed it, but nothing came out. It solidified, you silly wolf. Rain grunted then dropped it back in the sand where he rapidly tore off the shell revealing the soft white interior. He scented the fresh steaming egg white, his eyes slowly widening at how enticing it smelt. He tore into it, devouring it to the yolk, then pausing as he took in the savory eggy flavor. It didn't take long to scarf the rest down and he was left licking the inside of the shell. It's good. Rich, normally I prefer food raw but this is better cooked. I've seen kobolds eat eggs raw but never snake eggs. I figured there must be a reason. She piled up a few more of the eggs over the fire and then rushed around the sandy clearing digging up bits of very dry and very old dead wood which she tossed on the pile. Quickly enough Rain had more eggs incoming and he happily ripped them apart and licked the shells clean. He found he could manage a lot of the things before he had to wait and digest them so it only took a few rounds to entirely polish off the eggs. Each time Opal came up and lay on top of him, feeling his body grow beneath herself. After a little time spent basking in the afterglow of a big meal, Rain sat up and shifted the goblin off his chest. I'm still really hungry, and having that snake so near is not helping. He licked his lips as he eyed the great beast then getting his feet underneath him he stood. Yes. Eat the snake. You can grow so much from it, bigger and bigger. Said the goblin, her eyes sparkling as she looked up at his new height, inches taller than before. She grabbed him by the paw and excitedly led him to the end of the snake. Rain picked up the tail and put the tip in his mouth. Opal helped hold it up in the air and he pushed the thing into his maw and bit down and chewed. The scales of the snake had a shockingly lemon fresh crisp taste to them and the interior a lush and juicy umami beef flavor, totally different from anything he had expected but a strangely brilliant combination that he instantly relished. He eagerly tore into it, 2 feet of snake, 3 feet, 4. He shoved forward eager to fit more inside and rapidly reached 6 foot along its tail. The snake's body was getting thicker by this point and Rain's jaws had to spread wide to take it in. He didn't stop though as his stomach expanded. Opal was trying her best to push the snake toward his mouth but it was becoming too much for her. Fortunately Rain could rely on his own strength and helped haul more toward his teeth. He slowed as he reached the limit of what he could eat in one go. More. Said the goblin, her hands shaking as she tried to hold the weight of the snake's tail up. Rain shook his head and closed his eyes unable to speak with so much snake filling his mouth. He furrowed his brow, readying to break off, then opened his eyes in surprise as he felt his stomach rumble to life and begin to digest. He groaned as he felt growth stutter start then stop as though it was being delayed and banked up, as though it were unable to begin working on his body because he was still eating. Instead of stopping and just letting the growth happen however he let his instinctual hunger drive him and pushed forward, managing to rip and bite another foot of snake inside himself, pushing out his shrinking stomach again. Are you digesting as you eat? Said the goblin as another foot of snake pushed into the wolf's mouth. Rain ignored her and focused on eating. He was digesting as fast as he could bite and push the snake meat down his throat by now, and he hurried to press forward even as he felt the potential growth amassing, waiting to get to work. 15 feet up the snake he came across the first bulge a kobold made in the snake's body. He eyed it and grimaced. No time to waste. He bit down on the snake, swallowed, then dove on the encased kobold, unwilling to let his digestion end. He succeeded and managed to rip through and shove enough of the spicy meat down his gullet that his gut was kept busy and his taste buds excited at the variation in flavor. The snake was stripped away and the kobold inside was eaten limb by limb, even the head was taken apart. With a slightly crazed look in his eye Rain threw himself onto the rest of the snake using his claws to help rend it apart and shovel its meat into his mouth all while gulping down everything he could fit his teeth around and bite down on. He didn't stop, his hunger just kept rising and he drove forward eager to sate himself. The second kobold's body met its fate beneath his jaws, and then the third and the fourth. By this point the snake's body was a few feet wide and he had to slow down just due to the increased mass he needed to cover. He could feel his jaws tiring as he went, making the speed with which he ate a little less. It was a marathon, but one he couldn't tear himself away from. His hunger demanded more, always more. All the while the growth banked up and up inside. It had an almost real weight to it, eager to crash down on his body. He finished the fifth embedded kobold and moved on up to the head of the snake. Bone didn't stand a chance beneath his teeth and crumbled and splintered under the pressure, so that when he hit the boniest part of the snake, the skull, it didn't slow him at all. He bit ragged chunks from it, rapidly working his way through the head until he was left with nothing but the tongue and snout, and then that was gone too. He collapsed to the ground, knocking Opal aside, and writhed as the massive surge of banked-up growth rolled through him. It felt like a morning stretch multiplied by 1,000, almost painfully so. He clawed at the sand and his back arched as his bones grew, muscle expanded, teeth lengthened, his very blood felt like it was heating up and rushing through his veins, his skin stretching over his broadening shoulders, longer limbs, larger paws, his claws extending outward, until with a final rough surge it ended and he collapsed limply on the ground and immediately passed out. He awoke a few minutes later to find Opal sitting on his chest and poking at his nose. "Ugh," he groaned. "Why did I do that?" He noted his voice was a little deeper. The more he grew the deeper it got, and after the snake noticeably so. "Dunno. Guess you were hungrier than you realized. I feel exhausted." "Well, you did grow a lot." Rain rubbed at his face. "I'm not surprised. I just ate an entire 50-foot snake plus 5 kobolds." "Yes. Yes you did," said Opal, biting her lip. Rain pushed the goblin off his chest and tiredly clambered to his feet. The goblin had to crane her neck to look up at him now, as the top of her head didn't even reach the bottom of his pecs. He estimated he was well over 6 foot, maybe 6 foot 5 inches, a significant jump from when he had left the goblin camp, over a foot taller. She placed her hands flat on his abs and admired their difference in size. We should find more," she stammered, her voice coming out wobbly. "You're more insatiable than I am." No more for the moment. I feel like I fell down a hill and hit every rock on the way down, twice." "Beast, I hope you die," came a strained voice from behind. The pair turned to see that the leader kobold was still alive somehow, though he was surrounded by an alarmingly large pool of blood. "Ooh, and we don't even have to go far for your next meal." The kobold spat blood to his side. "I'll curse you on the way down your gullet, beast. I hope I poison you." "You're dying," said Rain, looking at the missing leg of the kobold and the chunk torn from his side. "Really? Brilliant observation, wolf, whatever you are. You'd make a good detective." Opal held up her knife. "I'm going to end you, you miserable shitty kobold." Rain put a large paw on her shoulder to stop her, however. "Do you have any enemies?" "What?" said the kobold, momentarily confused, although that could have been the blood loss. "Anyone you want to suffer, people you want vengeance on? I'm still going to eat you, but your fight with that snake impressed me, so if you tell me where I can find your enemies, I might find I happen to cross their path and eat them too." The kobold barked out a long laugh that ended in a wince as he shifted his injury. "Hilarious. The beast thinks he isn't my enemy. I would wish that you eat yourself, but I don't think you will do that, sad to say." "Fine. I have no enemy inside of my tribe that I would risk a monster like you going anywhere near my tribe. But outside, yes, always. Before we found this clutch of magnificent snake eggs and our unfortunate meeting with their owner, we were tracking a team of levelers, bastards that often raid us, kill my people, and worse. We lost track of them and the trail had gone cold, but maybe you'll come across them. If they haven't left already, they will most likely be encamped at the goat-shaped rock." That way he lifted a shaky arm and pointed with his cutlass before it fell from his feeble grip and impacted with the sand. "They are led by a skilled and tall leveler with black hair and a sword. Bite his face off for me, will you? Preferably while you are dying with a sword in your gut." Rain lunged forward and grabbed the kobold around the neck. "Tall, black hair? Did you hear of his name? Was it Brax?" The kobold smiled, showing his bloody teeth, and then spat blood over Rain's face. Rain reeled back as it splashed across his eyes and hurriedly wiped it away, only to find the kobold leader had expired and lay still as stone. Chapter 17. The goblin swung her new cutlass experimentally and admired her new gold necklace as they walked. Rain worked a green scale free from his teeth with a claw. The kobold leader had possessed a much tougher body to chew on than the other kobolds, another sign that it would have been a bad idea to fight him when he was unwounded. Rock shaped like a goat, muttered Rain, turning over what the kobold had said. Yeah, I sometimes went there when scouting for the tribe. A lot of the time it would have levelers camped by it, so it was dangerous. They like the spot for some reason. I guess it's a convenient safe place near the stairs to a higher floor of the dungeon. She shrugged and pointed with her new cutlass. It's right there, follow me. She led the way through a crack in the wall and they shuffled through until they came out on a shelf of rock overlooking a vast cavern which had in the center what seemed a monolithic upright cuboid rock formation. The formation had apparently been carved in some distant time past as the top quarter was loosely shaped like a goat's head. A cluster of trees grew on top of the rock formation draping greenery down its side. The rest of the cavern was relatively barren with only a number of rocks spread sparsely around the sands. As such it was easy to see the campfire and rising pillar of smoke at the base of the formation. Oh shit, they really are there, exclaimed Opal. We don't know if it's the same group that the kobold mentioned, we need to get closer. They climbed down from the shelf and wandered into the cavern proper. It didn't make for good cover and the pair were wary with how they approached and carefully hid from sight. The campfire as it came into view was surrounded by more people than any single adventuring team Rain had ever known. It wasn't until they got closer that he realized why that was. A number of goblins and kobolds were chained around the edge of the camp while a skinny hobgoblin oversaw them. The actual adventuring team sat around the fire. A tall elf with black hair, an even taller female orc who looked to be nearly 7 foot tall, and beside her a human woman. The woman had wavy blonde hair and wore form-fitting hunting leathers under a loose cloak, a staff lay by her side. I know why you want this Brax person. He was one of your old slavers, wasn't he? Opal nodded at the elf. No, I have no idea who that elf is. But the woman, that's Eliza. I don't know why she is with a shady group like this, but that isn't going to stop me from killing her. Well, you aren't getting at her like this surrounded by her allies. Rain gnawed on his lip. We should get closer, maybe if we hear their plans we can figure something out. They crept to the edge of the camp, maybe too close. A chained goblin spotted Rain and he froze unsure what to do until Opal raised her finger to her lip in a shushing motion and the goblin quite deliberately looked away from them. Rain hurried to get out of sight behind a boulder. Lucky. That gobbo could have called out. Maybe we can free the goblins without being noticed and then when they are chasing them down I get Eliza. I'm not sure I'd be able to get near without being noticed to free them, you defiantly can't. Rain frowned but remained quiet too. Listen. Voices drifted over and they peeked around the stone. Here, Eliza, warm my meat. No. I'm not that kind of mage. How many times have I told you, I don't do fire. If you want it warmed stick it down your pants you stupid orc. Biwahaha. Ola, quit being a tease, you'll just get slapped down again. Not my fault she has a stick up her ass and can't take a joke, the orc grumbled. Hey, relax, we got a good haul, plenty of throwaway slaves we can sell off. Just think of the money. Yorg, don't say that. I feel dirty enough working with you too. You'll change your tune with a fat stack of coin in your hands, don't you worry. No way. I wouldn't be doing this if I weren't in so much debt for buying this stupid staff. Soon as we're done we're parting ways. Ola here said something similar back in the day and now she's my reliable partner in business. The orc nodded. Honor and all that is bullshit. Strength is the only virtue, everything else is meaningless, you know that, it's the same with leveling. The strong stand on the weak and relish every moment of it. Someone 10 levels above you can lean on you, someone 20 levels above you can take everything you own and make you their bitch and you won't be able to do a thing about it. Same shit we do with these level-less monsters. You can think of them as level 1 if you like, it's not our fault they are so weak. Oh. I knew someone who was level 1. As an adult. Really? Bet they got squashed like a bug, huh? It wasn't like that. But they were squashed in the end, no. You see my point. Oi. Your high and mighty levelerness is. The orc narrowed her eyes in annoyance. What is it, Hop? The wheedling voice that had spoken up belonged to the skinny hobgoblin who had been walking amongst the slaves and seeing to their chains. He held up a goblin by the scruff. This one says we got a gobbo stalker. Probably followed us from that little tribe we raided. Oh, said the elf. He rose from sitting and unsheathed a rapier at his side. Wind seemed to come from nowhere and blew out the tail of his coat dramatically. An after-dinner hunt to settle the stomach, I'll enjoy this. He began to slowly float into the air. Hey, don't piss off and leave me alone with the human, growled the orc, standing and heaving up what appeared to be an actual full-sized blacksmith's anvil on the end of a squared steel rod partly wrapped in cloth for grip. Fine, but it's none of my concern if you can't keep up. As his eyes turned outward and scanned the area, Opal and Rain panicked. What do we do? Hissed Opal. I don't know, that orc looks strong enough to snap me over her knee, and I don't even know what that elf is capable of. We gotta run. Rain nodded. No choice, it's our only shot. He looked down at her legs. You're okay to do that, right? You've got your strength back? Yes, I've been fine for ages now, worry about yourself, she said, stretching her legs as though readying for a race. Alright, on 1, 2, 3. They bolted from behind the rock and fled back to where they had entered into the cavern. There. I see the goblin. And something else. What the fuck is that? Ola, care. The elf swooped through the air, quickly gaining on them, and Rain glanced behind to see the orc was sprinting from the camp, her muscular legs pounding the ground like pistons, each step causing an explosion of sand behind her. Fortunately, their entry point was nearing, a crack in the cavern wall on a slightly raised shelf of stone. Lightning exploded to one side and Rain yelped as speckles of molten sand rained over him. Missed. Damn it. Stay still so I can shoot you, goblin girl. Came a scornful voice from above. Leave some for me, you stupid elf, bellowed a voice further behind. Rain zigzagged, hoping to avoid being hit, but no more attacks came and he successfully made it to the rock shelf and scrambled up its side to the crack. It was only then he turned and realized Opal wasn't with him. She was far behind, half running on shaky legs, half jogging, as he watched she weakly sunk to the ground before getting control of herself and rising to run again. The elf was casually floating above, looking down at her with amusement. She ran, but the end was inevitable. The elf flourished his hand and the goblin was slammed into the ground as though buffeted by a gale force wind. As she hit the sand, the orc stomped up behind them. There, gotcha. What is that? Said the orc, staring at Rain. Is it drenched in blood? It's like some kind of bipedal wolf thing. I'm not sure. It's like no monster I've seen or heard of before, and I've come across quite a number. Some kind of leveler, an intelligent higher species that's not well known. Most levelers are bipedal. Doubt it, it looks feral. Just look at its eyes, there's something wrong with it. Unsettling. The elf shivered despite himself. Bet I could take it. Don't be stupid, Ola. It's a complete unknown. There are old slavers and there are bold slavers, but there are no old bold slavers. You know that. HMP. Fuck that noise. Hey, black and bloody. Come get some. Shh. Don't provoke it. Ola held up a thick finger at him. Listen closely, elf. Go find a pair of rocks about the size of my fist, get that stupid scarf you wear, tie those rocks up, and then dangle them from your crotch. Hopefully that will inspire you to grow a pair. The elf shot a bolt of lightning beside the orc, causing her to yelp and drop her anvil hammer. Stop being a fool. This is a dungeon, not an Orcish brawling house. The orc glowered at the floating elf. Fuck you. The elf ignored her and drifted down to the ground beside Opal. He produced a steel collar from his coat and snapped it around her neck. Rain could only watch, frozen in place. His instincts were screaming at him to run and leap at the elf and kill him, but his reason, earned in his previous life, warred back in a panic, telling him he stood no chance at all against someone high level enough to freaking fly, and someone who could wield what must have been an entire 400 or 500 pound anvil as a hammer. I won't be a slave, screamed Opal, clutching at the collar. Her eyes caught Rain's for a moment, and that one look alone was enough to communicate all of her intent. She had said slave to tell him that she would not die immediately and not to risk himself yet. She had said won't because she intended to escape at some point in the future. He need only follow and wait for the opportunity to help. He grit his teeth until it felt like they would crack. He wanted Opal back. He had never expected to feel so covetous and possessive over the goblin. She was his. He managed to control himself with difficulty and then forced himself to move to the shadowed crack in the cavern wall. With one last glance behind, he disappeared inside. Chapter 18. Opal yelped as the hobgoblin smacked her to the ground. Her gold necklace was in one of his fists and her cutlass was at his hip. Why are you doing this? Why help the levelers? Said Opal, rubbing her cheek. The hobgoblin shrugged. It's a life. That us gobos are shit to each other makes it easy. We can escape, rise up, get freedom. The hobgoblin picked his nose. Now I'm here cause I get paid. How do you think these clueless adventurers even find gobbo tribes? He jabbed a thumb into his chest, still picking his nose. But they see you as nothing. Just experience for levels. A hob like me ain't worth shit. Inexperience to those high levelers. I got more value than that as a guide and tracker. Economics in it. Opal sighed, disappointed that he wasn't going to be persuaded. Not that she expected him to be, if he were then the other enslaved goblins would have escaped by now. The levelers that the hobgoblin served were busy packing up. The elf had decided he didn't want to sleep with Rain nearby. Opal considered that a wise move. Already the goblins and kobolds were being shuffled into a line by the hob, each chained to the next slave in line. Opal was near the end, a chain connected to her collar. The elf flew around the camp keeping a lookout as the orc and Eliza packed the last of their stuff away. It all fit in an overly large duffel bag which the orc swung over one shoulder. Opal eyed her bulging biceps. The orc really was astonishingly strong. She would need to be killed in her sleep if they were to have a chance. The procession of slaves set out with the orc at the head with a chain in the same fist that gripped her hammer. She tugged on it and the row of 24 slaves stumbled into motion. I still think you're overblowing things, grumbled the orc. Yes, I agree. What on earth did you see that spooked you enough to want to decamp? Said Eliza. It's just risk management. You see a monster you've never seen nor heard of before and it's covered from tip to toe in blood, enough blood that it didn't come from one creature alone. Well, you get the fuck out of town. That does sound worrying. Pshaw. It's just some monster. I could break it like a toy. The elf drifted by in the air, his posture as though he were on an invisible couch with his ankle rocking on one knee and his hands behind his head. I do wish you would learn from our peers' frequent premature demise, Ola. There is a reason that we are still going when so many quite respectable slavers have perished. Yeah, it's because I'm strong as fuck. The elf covered his face with one hand and shook his head. No, my dear orc. It's because we don't take risks. We don't go after the truly dangerous monsters and we don't push our luck. Eliza raised her hand. But aren't the dangerous monsters more valuable? Yeah, what she said. Who's to say that black-furred fucker wasn't worth 1,000,000 gold? Let me put it this way. The slaver that goes after the truly dangerous monsters dies within a year. The slaver that goes after the less dangerous monsters, but doesn't make as much, lives, and over time they come to own a fortune multiple times the size the risk-taker ever had. It's all about playing the long game. Economics. The orc grumbled but didn't protest, irritably pulling on the slave's chain as they left the goat head cavern. They soon came to the base of a great stair that led between floors of the dungeon. A massive thing made by some unknown civilization eons ago, 40 feet wide, with 200 or 300 steps going upward and vanishing into the dark, and this was just one floor. Right, you goblin and kobold fucks, try to keep your feet in order. If one of you falls, make sure you catch them. Last time we led slaves out of here they all fell down like dominoes after the one at the front slipped over. I dragged the lot of them to the top on their asses. 2 of them died on the way. You've been warned. The slaves, looking nervous, formed into a relatively straight line behind the orc as she took to the stairs. They followed meekly after her. Opal eyed the surroundings and wasn't surprised to see a dark shadow disappear behind a rock. They had a stalker. She elbowed the goblin next to her and hissed at them. The forlorn-looking goblin looked up. Hey, she said, I got someone on the outside looking to break us free. They're strong. If we give them an opportunity they can kill any one of those leveler assholes as long as it's a surprise attack. The goblin stared at Opal. Why are you so clean? Opal scowled and avoided looking her in the eye. I fell in a lake. Listen, forget that, I've got someone who can help who isn't in chains. Our whole tribe was crushed just by the orc. What chance does one lone gobbo stand? He isn't a gobbo and he took down my old tribe alone, including our witch goblin and hobgo. The goblin gave her a funny look. Why is he with you now then? Would you pick teaming up with the dying remains of a gobbo tribe or the one who beat them but is open to help? Fair. I guess. Anyway, the thing I wanted to ask is, well, you lot have been here longer than me, surely you've got something? An escape plan. The goblin shrugged. Not really. But the kobolds? Yeah, maybe. The goblin kicked the kobold in front of them in the tail. She turned around with a scowl. What do you want, you stinky, unwashed goblin? The goblin grinned back at her. This one says she's got a friend on the outside. The kobold eyed Opal suspiciously, clearly noting how clean Opal was and raising an eyebrow. Why did you have a kobold cutlass and necklace when you got here? Oh, that, right. If you really want to know, me and my friend came across a dying kobold leader. The kobold had found a giant snake's nest and tried to kill the snake and take the eggs, but the snake and the kobold only managed to kill each other after a great battle. The kobold impressed my friend so much with his courage that he offered him a boon before his death. He told us to kill this leveler team he said was raiding his tribe. It didn't really go as planned since I'm here and the team isn't dead. Mostly true, but I don't think she's gonna buy it. Why would you tell me that? That sounds completely unbelievable. She was silent for a moment. This kobold, did he have green and red scales? Yeah, that's the one, he could breathe fire too. Grexon, that pompous scaly asshole, I knew I recognized that cutlass, of course he would get himself killed greeting for snakes. Alright, fine, that's at least a little believable. Well, have you got a plan? The kobold sneered. She reckons her friend can kill one of the levelers if it's a sneak attack. Says he took on her old tribe alone and won, said the goblin. The kobold eyed Opal. Well, you came to complete that boon, so I suppose you have motivation you otherwise would not. She hesitated and then opened her mouth, showing a crude solid gold key hidden beneath her tongue. Opal blinked. How? It's gold, isn't it? Soft. I had a gold coin and now I have a key because I shaped it with my teeth. Wow, that's actually legitimately impressive. It works. The kobold seemed pleased and nodded. Already tested it. Just waiting for them to sleep. The line had made it up to the top of the stair by this point and they stumbled onto flat ground. Opal took a moment to peer back down and spotted a black tail sliding behind a pillar on one side of the stair. The levelers were conversing up ahead and after a moment the orc sighed and pulled on the chain once more. One more floor so the princess can sleep easy. The slaves groaned but trudged after the orc as they made their way over to a second giant stair and began to ascend. Sometime later they crossed onto the next floor and the elf led them through a number of dark caves until they came to one that was dimly lit by veins of crystal running through the walls. The elf had the orc and Eliza make camp and soon they were as they had started, tents, fire, and slaves chained to iron stakes that the orc rammed into the ground with her hammer. About an hour later the levelers crawled into their tents and fell asleep. A few hours after that a shadow crept into the cave. Out of the gloom a pair of unsettling yellow eyes approached. Opal had to put a hand over the mouth of the nearest goblin as they saw Rain and tried to cry out. It's a friend. They'll help us escape, she whispered. The goblin slowly nodded but looked scared as the shadowy beast moved nearer and then looked like they were going to wet themselves when Rain grinned at Opal. Opal put a hand on her collar. I've got something for this. Hang on. She turned to the kobold with the key who was watching Rain warily. Well, what is that monster? She shook her head. Never mind, not now. She plucked the key from under her tongue and unlocked her collar, then passed it to Opal who did the same, then to the next goblin in the line and so on, swiftly freeing more and more. Hey, what you doing? Came a nasally voice. It was the hobgoblin who had been crouched near the tents and distractedly carving a bit of wood. The goblins and kobolds froze. Chapter 19. Go! Cried Opal. Rain burst into motion and his legs powered him across the camp in one fluid leap. He landed on the hob and smashed him to the ground where his teeth came down on the unfortunate hob's neck. With one savage motion he tore out his throat, literally ripping it from his body. Opal rushed up beside him as the sound of disturbed sleep started to emanate from the tents. They're waking. She hissed. Rain swung between the three tents, unsure what to do. He made a decision and sprung on the nearest. Ripping through the side he came down on its sleeping occupant teeth first, viciously biting down with the intent to kill as fast as possible. He had one split-second look at a terrified elf who had woken up to see Rain's blood-covered head sticking through the wall of his tent, and then his maw descended on the elf's face and savagely tore it off in a fountain of gore, along with a good portion of his skull and brain leaving behind a horrifying ruin. A furious roar came from the tent next door and the orc charged through the side of her tent, crashing directly into the tent Rain was in. A muscular shoulder rammed into him and he went flying from the canvas with a yelp and slammed into the cave's wall before slumping down. The orc roared once more and ripped apart the tent, covering her with her bare hands. She swung around looking for what she had shoulder-checked but completely missed Rain, who blended into the shadows. Instead, she was distracted by the recently freed kobolds and goblins running around in a panic. You fucking shits. What did you do to my elf? I'm going to kill you all. She stomped back to her tent and ripped it apart, then pulled her massive anvil hammer free, hefting it easily. She turned and brought it down on a goblin. The goblin exploded under the sheer force of it, spraying blood and skin and mashing everything solid that was left into the ground. She torqued and spun the hammer around herself, causing it to obliterate 2 kobolds and catapulting part of them across the cave at extreme speed, where they pulped against a wall. She strode forward, swinging at targets as Eliza crawled from her tent and used her staff to climb to her feet. She looked around wide-eyed at the chaos and brought the staff up. Water boiled from a chunk of azurite on its tip and 4 water orbs began floating around her, each nearly a foot in diameter. She swung her staff and they began gliding forward, homing in on escaped slaves. Once they reached a target, they engulfed the unfortunate victim's head and clung in place as they desperately thrashed around trying to move the unbreathable ball of fluid. Most hadn't been quick enough to hold their breath and were rapidly drowning. She suddenly flinched and turned, holding her staff up as a set of teeth leapt from the shadows. Paws grabbed her staff and the teeth came down on it, instantly snapping the staff in two. She let go and the black-furred monster flung the 2 halves aside. She stumbled backwards in fright as it came on. Do you recognize me, Eliza? I climbed out of hell for you, but look at the monster I've become. He spread his paws wide, bits of elf gore dripping from his snarling muzzle. What? Let me give you a clue. Me, you, Lyra, Udlin, Myra, and Brax all went to do a little power leveling. Then you all stabbed me in the back and tortured me to death for fun. Her mouth flapped open, working up and down as she tried to find words. Rain. Yes. You threw me away like trash, and for that, I am going to kill you. Wait. Please. I didn't mean it. I said as much. I said it was a mistake. I felt bad about it. After you gleefully gutted me like a fish, Eliza. Eliza's face went from pleading to scowling anger in an instant, as though a switch had been flipped. Oh, go fuck yourself, Rain. You turned into a monster. Yeah, that would be fitting. I'll ensure it's a short-lived experience. She lifted her hands into the air and the water orbs rushed back toward her in a dizzying orbit. They met and merged, forming one massive 2-foot-wide ball of water with a splash. She flung her hands forward and it rocketed at Rain. He tried to dodge, but it homed in on him and engulfed his shoulders and head. We threw your worthless ass in the lake, so I think this is a fitting end for your second death. She giggled as she held out her palms, keeping the huge ball of water over Rain as he stumbled about, hopelessly swinging at the yielding liquid. Air bubbled up from his mouth as he panicked. He tried to reach for Eliza, but to no avail. She simply backed away and kept him submerged. I'm going to skin you and sell your pelt so you will have at last found a way to contribute a little value to our town, Rain. Choke and fill your lungs and wait. What are you doing? Rain had stopped moving and was standing still with his mouth open wide. Eliza blinked and stared at him. Are you trying to drink it? You can't be serious. Pf haha. Rain met her eyes through the watery orb and the corners of his mouth curled. Then he began to swallow. The water rushed inward as though sucked in by a whirlpool, and the orb rapidly diminished, within seconds shrinking down to a foot across and then vanishing down the wolf's throat. He belched and patted his stomach. Nice try. But it was never going to work. And no. She wrenched her hands to the side, trying to affect the water trapped inside of him, but Rain simply set his feet and used his superior strength to override her globular control of the mass of water. He belched again. Never drank water like that. Oh, here we go. He rested a paw on his stomach as it rapidly shrank down to nothing and returned to flat. Was wondering if that would work. Too bad there's no growth though. Eliza stared at his flattened abdomen. What? Where did it go? She moved her hands, trying to shift the now non-existent water. Oh, is that all you've got? Guess this is going to end quicker than I like. Oh well. Time to eat you. He stepped toward her, causing her to back away in fear. Hey, hold on, you can't be serious. You're just some level less freak, you can't eat me. I'm going to bite your legs off and splinter your bones, Eliza. I'm going to make you watch me eat you alive bit by bit, your fingers, your toes, your limbs. You will beg me to kill you. Eliza's eyes went wide. No. You can't. Rain. I'll do anything. What do you want? Money. P power. Leveling. Power leveling? Is that a joke? He snorted. No, karma caught up Eliza. This is the end. Her knees shook as she backed up against the cavern wall, unable to take her eyes off Rain's own yellow eyes. She scrabbled blindly behind herself, desperate for an escape. Rain. Look out. Cried a goblin voice, and Rain dropped to the ground as the orc's anvil hammer flew through the air, having been hurled, sailing just past where his torso had been. It struck the wall next to Eliza and fractured it from top to bottom with an ear-splitting boom. Huge sheets of rock sloughed off and toppled to the ground. Eliza screamed and threw her arms over her head as she was peppered with high-velocity splinters of stone. Fuck. Fuck. Fuck this. She grabbed at her side and ripped off a water skin attached to her belt. She frantically pulled the cap free and upended it on the ground, squeezing it out as fast as possible. Rain looked up in surprise from where he lay prone. She slammed her hands together in a strange hand seal and began breathlessly and rapidly chanting. The puddle of fluid she stood in began to faintly glow, and then, to Rain's utter outrage, she began to sink into it, her legs quickly disappearing. He scrambled to his feet and lunged at her, arm extended, paw reaching. He grabbed a fistful of her hair and heaved back, causing her to scream. Rain underestimated his own strength, however, and that the pool had an unstoppable grip on her, and a good third of her long blonde hair was ripped from her scalp, leaving an angry red welt behind. She screamed again and slapped her hands down over her bleeding head. A tearful face shot him a look of pure withering hatred. As she dipped below the puddle's surface, Rain could only watch as her lips formed words with no sound, carefully directed at him. I liked what I did. She vanished below and the water stopped glowing and became normal, unmagical water once more. Rain stood there with a chunk of bloody blonde hair held limply in his paw. His whole body trembled with rage. I liked what I did. She had enjoyed gutting him. Her pretenses were always just that, a facade. She'd never had an ounce of kindness in her. She was as twisted as Myra or Brax or any of the others. Demons without the outward appearance of demons. He snarled and flung her hair to the ground. He spun around looking for something to take his growing fury out on, just in time as a heavy orc fist was flying toward his head. He shifted aside as it whistled past, actually brushing by his fur. He dove out of the way of the charging orc and scrambled to keep his feet under him. Ola stumbled to a stop, having missed and almost lost her balance. She turned with a massive grin on her face and her eyes gleaming with excitement. It's you. You bloody black-furred fucker. You've come to fight me. Rain ignored her words and lunged at her, arms outstretched, eyes wild with rage. Whoa there, said the orc as claws reached for her muscular neck. A massive green fist came up and grabbed one of his arms by the forearm, but not before his other claws managed to lacerate her skin, sending a sheet of blood washing down the side of her neck. Savage fucker, aren't you? Strong too. I'm gonna enjoy beating you to a pulp. She swung her arm out, holding Rain up in the air and away from herself as he struggled. She then shook him back and forth so violently that it caused Rain to be momentarily stunned. Must he not like it when he gets pushed around? Rain's yellow eyes stared her down. I'm going to make you regret that. The orc blinked in surprise. Oh, you can tell Argate she. She screamed as Rain lunged up and bit one of her fingers, holding him clean off. The orc instinctually threw him aside, sending him tumbling and rolling across the ground. You piece of shit. Look what you've done to me, cried the orc, holding up a bleeding stump where her index finger once was. Rain crawled to his feet and rolled his jaw. He then opened his mouth and quite deliberately showed the orc her dismembered finger resting there. Hey, give that back. There's healers that can reattach shit like this. Good monster, just hand it here. Rain swiftly diced the finger with his teeth and swallowed the chunks. Blood dripped from his mouth as he gave her his most predatory grin. Fuck, roared the orc, and she lunged for her anvil hammer where it lay, grabbed it up, swung it over her head, and hurtled toward Rain. Rain was caught unprepared by her explosive speed and cut a close dodge. The hammer came down, but it was a bluff and she caught it halfway through the arc. She set her hips and legs and twisted her body, torquing into a side swing. It just glanced off Rain's side. He could practically hear his ribs creak as they deformed under the brushed weight of the anvil. He was sent rolling, his limbs flailing as he went down. I've got you now, you finger-eating fuckhead, crowed the orc as she strode forward and swung the anvil hammer down on him from above like an unstoppable meteor. Rain tried to get up in time, desperately trying to get his feet under him quickly enough to have time to get out of the way. Too late. Only one choice left. He reached out his paws above his head, and he caught the anvil. Boom! The pressure wave blew through him and the stone floor fractured as his feet were pushed down with unfathomable energy. His bones screamed and he could physically feel his muscles shredding apart under the immense weighted momentum he was desperately trying to hold back. His claws dug into stone and rock, sheared and shattered in a widening circle around him as he struggled to keep from being crushed. The anvil kept on crashing down and down onto his shoulders. He roared and blood flecked from his mouth and the very air trembled with the noise. But he held. The anvil stopped still on his shoulder. The hammer had nearly broken him, and his legs shook like leaves in the wind. But he held. The orc stared at him stunned. Well, that's a first. She kicked him in the chest. Rain stumbled backwards, helpless to watch as the orc heaved her anvil hammer around in a full-body swing and hundreds of pounds of metal came at him. He couldn't even lift his ruined arms to stop it. The hammer freighted into him. His arm dangling by his side took it first and it shattered instantly, breaking up and down its length. Then his ribcage behind caved in, snapping ribs like twigs. The blow took him off his feet and the force of it sent him flying across the cavern to slam into the cavern wall where stone fractured and flesh tore before he crashed to the floor in a heap. Rain tried desperately to cling to consciousness as the heavy boots of the orc approached. Ha ha ha. Almost had me going for a second, you fuck. You're done now though, it's a small miracle you're still breathing. I think I'll mount your head on the wall as my trophy. Your body's a mess, so ain't much salvaging that, yeah? Rain ignored her and pushed himself back up against the wall. Then with immense effort he pushed upward with his legs, managing to stand, leaning against the stone for support, his back leaving a bloody smear in its wake, his arms useless at his sides. Oh, the fire in you. Shame Elfie died, would have done him good to see someone with a pair. Every breath Rain took was pain. You. He whispered. The orc stepped closer to hear. You've got green on you. She tilted her head, not understanding, and Opal slipped her knife around the orc's throat and slashed at her muscular neck. The blade penetrated, but shallow. The orc yelped and a hand came up to grab at the goblin riding her back, but she was already gone, only a cut to match the previous one Rain had made with his claws left in her wake. Rain leapt on the opportunity and heaved himself away from the wall. His jaws opened wide and his teeth fell on the forearm of the arm carrying the hammer and bit down like an unstoppable guillotine. Skin, fat, muscle all split apart, teeth met bone and sheared through them, such was his do-or-die strength. The hammer crashed to the ground with a green hand and part of an arm still clutching it. What? Screamed the orc, staring at her severed stump in horror. Rain stumbled forward, blood sheeting from his maw, his eyes intense and wild. The orc panicked and grabbed at his face with her other hand, trying to keep him away. Snap! Half her fingers vanished down Rain's throat. Bite! Her hand was inside his mouth and rapidly disappearing. She tried to pull away, but his jaws would not let go, and each bite made more of her vanish behind those hungry, greedy teeth. Already he was working his way toward her elbow. She screamed wordlessly and smashed her head down on the wolf in a wild headbutt. It worked, stopping Rain long enough for her to pull her arm free. She turned and ran, long legs shoving her forward. One step, two, a weight clamped down on her ankle and she tripped and fell. She turned and looked down in fright to see the black furred thing had thrown itself and managed to catch her in its jaws once more. It crunched down and severed her foot. Then it began to eat its way up her shin. She screamed and bellowed in fear, and her other foot came down to kick at the wolf. Crunch. The teeth bit at that foot too, shearing through her boot and right through to flesh and bone. She could only watch as it continued to eat her alive bit by bit, using its legs to shove itself forward as its arms were broken. It was consuming her from the feet upward. She screamed herself hoarse and tried to crawl away, the stumps of her arms fruitlessly dragging against the ground as she hyperventilated. Stop. Please. Oh gods. Rain didn't hear her. He was no longer conscious and his body was working of its own accord. Her muscular thighs soon went inside the beast, then her hips, then her abs and stomach. Her vision was getting dark and she stared up at the cavern's ceiling, unseeing. The elf was right. He was right, damn him. There's always something. Something out there. Something worse than a nightmare. Her eyes fluttered shut as implacable teeth met her rib cage and devoured her. Chapter 20. Rain's eyes crept open as growth stretched his limbs. He groaned and his back arched, his feet slipping across the floor as he pushed himself up. As the surge of growth left, he slumped back down, breathing deep. Opal looked down at him from where she was crouched over his head, worry creasing her brow. "Hey," said Rain. Opal pouted. "I thought you were gonna die." Rain paused. "So did I. What happened exactly?" "You got smashed up by the orc leveler real bad. I stepped in and saved your life." "Oh, I remember that bit. And then you seemed to black out and go into an eating frenzy. You ate that orc bitch alive." "Ah." He waved his paws in front of his face, both attached to quite healthy and undamaged arms. "I'm uninjured." "Well, you did eat a pretty big leveler, and then later, while you were still unconscious, I fed you 5 squished kobolds and a few goblins, and then all the camp's food supplies, and then even later the annoying floaty elf guy which finished off the healing. That last bit of growth was from that." "I see. HMPHH, no need to thank me." "Thank you, Opal. I mean it, I'd be dead without you." She blushed despite herself and looked away. "It's fine." Rain gathered himself and after a moment managed to sit up and then get to his feet. "Whoa, taller again. Voice is a little deeper too." He looked down at the goblin who couldn't help but keep snatching glances at him. He estimated he'd gained nearly 2 inches of height. The wonders of eating levelers. Did they leave anything useful in their camp? Opal pulled her shiny new rapier from her side, which was a match for her reacquired cutlass resting on her other hip. After showing him the sharp blade she sheathed it. "MHMM. That elf guy liked his quality. Sacks of coin too." "Really? How much?" Opal shrugged and went and fetched 3 bulging coin bags which she poured out onto the ground. A heaping pile of gold met Rain's eyes. "Apparently slaving pays pretty well. That's more gold than I've seen in my whole life, not that I've ever had the opportunity to see much. Levelers kill monsters, but taking us as slaves is something gobos actually fear more. The ones who escape do not have happy stories to tell. You would know that though, right?" Rain hesitated. He wasn't unfamiliar with monster slaving. The town of Lynthia where he lived his previous life even had a small monster slaving market. It was a bleak place that streets often ran red with blood, and the stories of casual cruelty that came out of it were enough to make your hairs curl. "I know. Goblins are known as disposable slaves." He hadn't actually thought of the slave market as anything but part of life and out of sight and mind in his previous life, something for the wealthy. It was always just there. He was beginning to wonder if that thinking was wrong somehow with his shift in perspective. He shook his head. Not his problem. Not now that he was an ungodly terror of a monster. He had Opal gather the coin back together and stow it in the bottom of her rucksack. "I can't help but notice you still have 3 slaves chained up," said Rain, gesturing at 2 kobolds and a goblin who were watching them warily. Opal scowled. "Yes, most got away even though I managed to get the key back. I tried to find and recapture them but they all went to ground, vanished into the tunnels. You can eat these ones now though, yes?" She seemed to cheer up a little at that last bit. Rain eyed the chains, recalling Opal wearing them. "No, not right now." "But why?" "It's free food. Aren't you hungry?" "I'm still recovering." "They're not going to get away, are they?" "They can be snacks for later." The chained-up goblin whimpered hearing that, and the 2 kobolds eyed Rain fearfully and backed away as far as their chains would allow. Rain pursed his lips. "You fed me in front of them, didn't you?" "Maybe." He sighed. "Never mind. Look, I want to be stronger, unstoppable, for next time I see those who enslaved me." He curled his paw into a fist. "I want to figure out how to do that, and fast. We're 2 floors up from where we started. The monsters are weaker around here, right?" Sort of. The middle dungeon just has a lot more tribal monsters, whereas the lower floors have fewer but more powerful single monsters, though you can still find them here too." "That actually sounds like a good thing. Tribal monsters are much easier to kill and there's more to eat if I kill a group." "Yes, the middle floors will be good for food, lots of monsters, lots to eat. Many levelers come here too, many more than the lower floors, and usually not as high a level, so they are easier to kill." She grinned. He nodded his agreement and then had her pack away the only tent that hadn't been ruined by the orc, Eliza's tent. It was much nicer than the old goblin tent they had been sharing, with no patches or tears. A big upgrade. Rain picked over the camp, but there wasn't much of value that Opal hadn't already taken and packed up. Most the slaves had gotten away, and what food there had been Opal had already fed him while he slept. He eyed the blood-covered anvil hammer lying on the stone floor, a brutal reminder of just how dangerous taking a leveler head-to-head could be. Rain didn't want to carry the chains the 3 slaves were attached to, so it was left to Opal. She handled it surprisingly well. Turned out that a rapier was quite good for motivation and discipline when prodded into the softer parts of the body. They wandered deeper into the tunnels looking for easy signs of monsters or levelers. It didn't take long to find a sandy stretch of unusually large tunnels lit by mosslight. In the sand were many webbed footprints, an alarming amount even. They decided to secrete the slaves in a side cave temporarily and then hide in a crevice tucked away behind a boulder so that they could spy on any potential passing traffic. A few minutes later they were disturbed from their watch by the sound of many tramping feet. "This is them, it's gotta be, that big a group must have been what made all those footprints," said Opal, peeking around the boulder excitedly. The owners of the many feet soon came into view. Rain already felt his mouth watering. Fish people. Fish. He liked fish. The fish-like people were blue-green scaled, short, barely 5 foot tall, and had ray fins protruding from their forearms, shins, tail, head, and back. Their heads were very fish-like and large, with droopy barbels and wide catfish-like mouths. They were also heavily armed with bone-tipped spears and wooden bucklers. "How many do you count?" 44. "I count 44 of them, yeah. I know these monsters, they're called piscine. Zlut. Must be a big tribal lake nearby. Don't talk to me about lakes, I'd kill for a bath right now. I wouldn't do that in their territory, they are nearly unbeatable in water, they just love to drag unsuspecting gobos under and go into a feeding frenzy." Really? At least they don't look as well armed as kobolds, better trained though. They watched the group march past. For the first time Rain heard a language that was not common. The piscine seemed to have their own unique language that consisted of burbling, warbling noises that the lead piscine of the march babbled at each other. The marching piscine disappeared around the corner and the pair slunk back away from the tunnel. "The problem is that we can't beat that many piscine in one go, there's just too many spears. They'd turn us into pincushions. Then we just need a strong monster to come and kill them, like the giant snake." "Sure, but we don't have that. So." Rain scratched at his ear, thinking hard. We just need a different kind of trap, right? Maybe a more traditional trap?" "No materials," scowled Opal. "Yes we do, we have the remains of the slavers' camp. We do have that is true." Rain could see machinations ticking into place behind Opal's eyes. "Got something?" "I don't know, maybe. Let's go back to the camp." They collected the secreted slaves and took them back through the path they had come by. Rain helped stake them down, then sat and watched as Opal picked around the camp, examining things with new eyes. Maybe we could do something with this," she said as she dragged the remains of the tents to the center of the camp. "Well, it's not complicated. We make a pit trap. We can use this canvas stitched together to cover the hole along with the tent poles. Piscine walks over and splat, they fall in." Rain peered skeptically at the heap of canvas. "I hope you don't mind me saying so, but this plan has some flaws." "No it doesn't, it's perfect." "Really now? And what's going to stop the back part of the army from stopping once they see the front half fall in?" The goblin paused. "I hadn't gotten that far. And what happens once they are in the pit? Can't they just climb out?" "Well, that's why we make sharp things to put in the bottom of the pit." "How? Out of what?" said Rain, looking around the camp. Opal gave him a sour look before suddenly brightening up. She scampered to a pile and pulled out a slave stake, a metal rod about 3 foot long with a point designed to be hammered into the ground so slaves could be left securely. "Alright, that could work maybe, and for the back half not falling in." Opal turned and her eyes fell on the increasingly nervous-looking slaves. Chapter 21. A slightly manic-looking red-scaled kobold wandered through a sandy tunnel. His eyes skittered off the walls as though terrified something was stalking him. The kobold was well armed in a manner of speaking. He held a sword in one claw. What was less obvious was that beneath his newly endowed clothing his wrist was chained to his hip so he was unable to raise it. On his front was a rectangular piece of canvas stretched over a wooden frame that hung down from his neck to his knees. On the canvas was a rather crude charcoal drawing of a kobold doing lewd things to a female piscine while a different piscine looked at the scene and cried. The copulating kobold and piscine had a number of poorly drawn hearts floating around their heads. Unsure of what he was waiting for, the kobold peered down the tunnel. He couldn't see much as a corner blocked his view. Still, he soon quite clearly heard the nearing tramping of many feet and began to back away. A deep growl came from somewhere behind him in the shadows and made him freeze in place out of fear. He could do nothing but watch as what appeared to be a small Piscine army rounded the corner and came into view. The front line stared at the kobold as they kept marching, and then as their eyes wandered downward and took in the drawing attached to the front of the kobold, they began to slow and angry muttering broke out, then warbling shouts and pointed fingers. A cry of rage came from a particularly personally offended Piscine at the back. Hey, said the kobold. I've got nothing to do with this. It's some kind of trap. You've got to listen to me. The Piscine ignored him and continued to argue and point. Please. I'm just a poor slave being made to do this against my will. I'm not your enemy. A more leaderly-looking Piscine with gold scales and carrying a trident in his webbed hand slammed the butt of his weapon into the ground and pointed an accusing finger at the kobold. He then asked what was probably some kind of important question. Unfortunately, it was in the Piscine language and completely unintelligible. Oh gods, they don't speak common. Oh no. The kobold panicked, and not knowing what else to do, he shook his head in the negative. This seemed to infuriate the leader, and he screamed at the poor kobold and took a step forward. The rest of the Piscine army took a threatening step forward too. The leader held up a hand, and as though to give the kobold one last chance to explain himself, he asked something else, biting off each word as though he was desperately trying to put aside his anger. The kobold listened, paused. Then he turned and ran. The Piscine looked on in shock. Then their eyes fell on the second different canvas rectangle attached to the kobold's back. This one showed a quite clearly pregnant Piscine in the background, while in the foreground a cheekily grinning and winking kobold gave a double thumbs up while taking a large poo in the open mouth of a crying Piscine. The poo was quite detailed, and someone had put quite a bit of time into shading it. As one beast, the Piscine army screamed their rage and stampeded down the tunnel. Howls of indignation echoed off the walls, none more so than from the leader Piscine, whose eyes were bulging out of his head out of sheer apoplectic wrath. The unfortunate kobold fled like the hounds of hell were on his tail. Sand flashed by, a newly built wall that diverted the tunnel into a side tunnel, then some slightly odd-looking sand, then normal sand again. A flash of green to the side, and a hand grabbed his arm and pulled him into a slim crack in the wall. A knife pressed into his side, and that one goblin who seemed to help the terrifying beast that ate everything appeared. He could only watch with her as the army of Piscine charged forward and over the odd bit of sand. They lasted only a moment before the canvas and tent pole frame collapsed under the strain and a yawning chasm opened up below them. The sheer rage of the Piscine kept those at the back driving forward, so those who were at the front and saw the whole coming could only howl in frustration as those behind pushed and shoved forward, tipping them into it. Opal stepped from the crack as the last few survivors stumbled to a stop and looked down in dismay at the hole that their brethren had fallen in. Not for long though, as a long stick prodded one in the back and shoved him into the hole. Then the next. It took a few seconds for the remaining Piscine to realize what was happening, and they turned to find Rain prodding them in one by one with an extended pole that easily outranged their own spears. They gnashed their teeth and screamed at him, but could do little as he used his overwhelming strength and range to punt them into the hole one by one. The kobold slave shivered. What a ruthless strategy. He feared this pair not just for his own sake but for the rest of kobold kind. I am a genius, cried Opal. I'll admit that went better than expected. Yes, praise me. That was glorious. Be praised, said Rain, bemused. Rain leapt across the hole in the ground and stood beside Opal to peer down into it, not before staking down the trembling kobold slave, however. Finding this hole really simplified things, said Rain, observing the mass of death far below. Well, it was either dig a hole or pile some rocks up to divert a tunnel. We don't really have anything useful to dig a hole with, so. She shrugged. We got lucky. This area has a lot of vertical shafts, to be honest. Sure. Here, tie off the rope. Opal unwound the rope she had taken from the slavers and tied to a nearby rock and handed it to Rain. He let the coil drop and slung himself down, rappelling down what must have been 40 feet of sheer rock face ending in a hard flat stone floor. His feet hit the bottom and Opal scrambled down soon after. A huge pile of bodies met his eyes, some still groaning as they had fallen on their comrades and hadn't been quite so fortunate to have a quick death. They wasted no time, and Rain ended lives with his teeth as Opal used her rapier to poke holes, though many had holes already as they had fallen upon a number of sharp metal stakes embedded in the ground. The goblin then pulled down the bodies one by one and stripped them bare of any clothing and equipment. Mostly loincloths and oddly shaped cuirasses. Soon she had a line of bodies forming. Rain didn't wait for her to finish and tore into it, devouring two at a time, compressing them down inside before needing to stop to digest. Gods, fish is a blessed food. If it weren't for levelers and giant snake, I think this would have taken my top spot in my ranking, opined Rain as the growth surge ended. The deep, brine buttery saltiness and oily firm texture was something Rain found he could really get his teeth into. He sighed, then opened his eyes and leapt on the next to be eaten, slavering maw open wide, eyes alight. He gorged on the piscine from feet to head, scales and webbing all of it went into his stomach, great bites letting him tear through the monster with spectacular speed. By the time he was a quarter of the way through the army, he was beginning to reduce the pauses between eating and he simply moved on to the next mid-digestion, banking up the growth like he had done with the snake. Opal finished laying out the dead and began happily shoveling them toward his gullet, helping him consume the piscine all the faster. She held them up one by one and literally pushed them toward his mouth, letting him focus on fitting as much as possible inside himself as quickly as possible. His stomach was managing to keep up, his ease of handling so many a sign he was growing overall larger. Rain blitzed his way through the unfortunate piscine army, halfway through, 3/4, then as he slowed with exhaustion he came to the last, the gold-scaled piscine leader, especially tasty, but he didn't slow or he was sure he would collapse. The leader was eaten body, limb, and tail, and Rain flopped over on his back, distended stomach poking in the air and heaving breaths as the wave of growth caught up to him and crashed into his body. He let out a long mindless groan as his paw pads inched across the ground and his body swelled, claws lengthening, chest enlarging, muscle expanding, bones elongating. Opal leapt on top of him as he grew, shoving a hand down her shorts and grinding her hips down into her hand. A line of drool ran from her slightly parted lips as she watched and felt him grow larger beneath her, her breath shaky and arrhythmic. Finally, it was all over and Rain slumped on the ground as limp as a wet noodle. Opal lay herself over his chest, her eyes looking up at him half-lidded. She bit her lip. They just lay there, basking in the aftermath for a time, not a worry in the world. Gods, I would kill for a bath. Chapter 22. Inquisitor Byra looked up as a fist hammered on her office door. She frowned and put her pen down beside the reams of paperwork she had gradually been working through. You may enter. The door opened and a girl slumped through, breathing hard. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess and lank with sweat. She looked as though she had run to her office from wherever she had come from. Judging from her appearance, she was an active adventurer of the dungeon. Not that informative considering the town was built to service one. What was more curious was the huge patch of hair that appeared to have been ripped from her scalp, leaving an angry red bleeding welt behind. Byra leant to one side and rested her chin on her fist as she eyed the girl. Girl, what makes you think it wise to come to me in a state like this? You're so out of breath you can barely get a word out and you look like you've been in a fight with a barber's wife. The girl shook her head and then seemed to steady herself. I want to report a problem. Something new. Please, go on. I am just in complete suspense to hear this, said the Inquisitor so dryly that it made deserts appear as oceans. The girl seemed to realize just who she was speaking to and cleared her throat awkwardly. Right. I was on a trip into the dungeon, part of a slaving team that liked to focus on minor tribal monsters like goblins minus. To the point, girl. Sorry. We were on our return trip when we came across a monster none of us had ever seen before. At first I only saw a glimpse of a shadow figure, but later I saw it in full. It looked sort of like a bipedal wolf. Gone feral, with yellow eyes and black fur completely drenched in blood. Our team leader decided that he didn't want us to fight it, and so we avoided it and went up 2 floors of the dungeon. I hope that there is more to this story than just a sighting, or I will have you cleaning out the stables for a month for wasting my time. Yes. There's more. We made camp in East Quadrant and thought we were safe, but soon after we had gone to sleep the creature attacked and set our slaves free. It killed our hobgoblin scout and then killed the leader of our team, a powerful aeromancer. But what came after was why I came here. She took a deep breath. The black-furred monster attacked me, I fought back, and then it spoke to me. It told me that it used to be someone I knew, a human. Byra leant forward, her brow furrowing. Or rather a prior group that I was with, were given permission by the town's ranker to kill that person. We took him out to the dungeon for ease of disposal, killed him, and threw his remains in the big lake on the bottom floor. The black-furred creature knew of this and named everyone who was there. It claimed that it was that human but returned from the dead and turned into a monster. He promised revenge. I only escaped due to my new unique magic. Curious. It's true I don't know of any monster or species with that physical description, and I know more than most. A human leveler that became a monster? Yes. That's the thing. It sounds insane, but it's real. He had some strange ability that allowed him to consume and absorb things. I didn't get to see what he was capable of, but he let slip that it's linked to growth. And an ability I have also never heard of. If you did not seem so sincere, I would suspect you were making this up. Never. I would never lie to an inquisitor, only a fool would do such a thing. Quite. Very well, your name. It's Eliza. There's a reward, right? It's just I recently got a special class and I lost my new water staff for that, and you know how, they're expensive. Eliza. You did well to come to me. Inquisitors place high priority on seeking out dungeon anomalies before they become an issue and nipping them in the bud. If I can confirm your words, then yes, you will receive an appropriate reimbursement. However, I will command you not to breathe a singular word about this. If this truly is as you say a leveler somehow become monster, then this is a highly confidential matter. Now go and get yourself cleaned up and leave this with me. The girl hesitated, bowed, and then fled from the Inquisitor's presence. Byra rubbed her chin. A shadowy monster. Where did I read that recently? She rifled through some minor reports at the side of her desk and pulled a paper free, a single sheet. A statement on the demise of half of a team of adventurers to a horde of Shroomlian monsters. Nothing unusual for this dungeon. Idiot levelers got themselves killed all the time. What was curious was that one of the survivors seemed convinced that they were being stalked by a black-furred shadowy bipedal thing and that it had caused the Shroomlians to swarm and attack the team. An interesting data point perhaps grounding this Eliza girl's story. She noted that the two survivors of the team were currently accusing each other of having murdered the team's healer. She put the report back from where she had retrieved it. She tapped her pen on the table thinking. An inquisitor had many responsibilities as the queen's eyes and claws. Ensuring that a dungeon didn't become a problem was one of them. There were towns and cities wiped off the map when particularly powerful monsters escaped a dungeon or a monster species had bred out of control and spilled out over the land. Making up her mind, she put her pen aside and stood from her desk. She opened her armoire and pulled on her favorite black pauldrons over her blouse and then affixed her black vambraces to her arms, then, at last, her favorite black gauntlets. High quality and lightweight, they were decorated around the edges with gold filigree, a gift from her mother. She affixed a ruby-pommeled longsword to her hip, taking care to arrange it so it could be withdrawn with ease, a habit born from long practice. She checked herself in the mirror. A human face, well, mostly, a pair of black dragon horns emerged from atop her white wavy hair, a mark of her distant dragon bloodline. She considered herself blessed to have even this small mark. Her parents, both human, had none, as the mark was rarer to manifest so many descendants later. The horns gave her an imposing figure, not that she wasn't already intimidatingly severe. She hummed contentedly with her appearance. Her parents had teased her about her vanity. She personally felt it appropriate as dragons were known to be vain. She spun on her heel and her armored boots clicked as she left her office. She snapped her fingers as she passed through, the sound like a whip crack that hurt the ears. A red-haired human girl who had been napping in a chair in the hallway squeaked and jumped to her feet, looking around in fear. Come, Jilly. We're going to the dungeon to look into an anomalous report. Maybe you can learn a thing or two. Why, yes, Inquisitor, said the girl, flinching to attention and then hurriedly following after the striding inquisitor as she blew past. Will it be dangerous? I have my sword, but I do not know, it may be nothing, though my instinct tells me something is afoot. It has been a while since the queendom has seen a serious monster emergence from a dungeon. I'd like to keep it that way. Of course, Inquisitor. The pair clumped downstairs and emerged into a bustling room where scribes working under the queen talked and exchanged paperwork. Byra strode up to the largest figure in the room, a minotaur lazing on a chair, his hooves on the table. Several empty beer mugs lay strewn around him and a goblin slave held a freshly filled one ready as the minotaur worked through his current one. He burped and gave the inquisitor a sour look. About that time, huh? Coulda given me some warning, I ain't ate yet. Then choose breakfast over beer next time, you insufferable moron. Oh. Never. The nectar of the gods fuels this body of mine. He belched loudly and Jilly covered her nose and mouth in disgust. You won't be receiving coin to pay for said beer if you don't get to your hooves and move, Drumus. Yeah, grumbled the Minotaur. He slugged back the last of the beer he was drinking and then grabbed the second beer from the goblin slave, causing her to stumble forward. He then chugged that to the dregs and belched lazily once more. Then with more effort than was probably warranted he slid his hooves off the table and climbed to his feet. He picked up a well-worn mace from where it lay by his chair. Right, I'm ready. Let's go fuck up whatever needs fucking up. The Inquisitor set her lips in a line. We need to acquire one other before heading to the dungeon. Come. The Minotaur nodded then paused. 1 sec. He clubbed the goblin slave over the head and she fell to the ground limp. He then grabbed her by a leg and picked her up in the air. Oh, Mr. Drumus, Minotaur sir? Is that legal? Don't worry yourself, lass, it's just a rental, said the Minotaur, stomping out the building after Byra, goblin dangling in hand. They passed by a wooden slave bin with the words temp slave drop off marked on the side and he tossed the goblin inside. And closed the lid. See, their problem now. Jilly raised a hand as though to protest, but the Minotaur ignored her and stomped after Byra. Byra stalked through the streets, passing pedestrians leaping to get out of her way when they noticed who she was. The trio arrived at an inn and without preamble she kicked open the door. The noisy interior went silent as she stepped inside and looked around, 100 eyes watching her in surprise or fear, beers halfway to mouths, coins held in the air mid-transaction. Her violet eyes came to rest on one large table covered in cards and coins. Her eyes narrowed seeing a shirtless halfling lying atop a mound of coin, a pipe in his mouth. Ah, shit, said the halfling. Byra snapped her armored fingers, causing half the inn to flinch, and Drumus charged toward the table. The halfling tried to scramble away, but a large meaty hand came down and grabbed him by the seat of his pants and yanked him into the air. Byra beckoned and they began to leave. She paused at the door and glanced back. As you were. The inn moved back into motion and a number of fights started over the coin the halfling had left behind. They stepped back into the street and continued. Hey. What's the big idea? You can't just kidnap me. You know as well as I do, Fosco, that you are under contract to the Queen. If you do not wish to have your debauchery interrupted, then I suggest you write a letter and have your contract voided. For the moment, however, you are mine and I am not pleased with your previous convenient disappearances whenever an excursion into the dungeon is planned. I suggest you make an example of yourself or I will use my superior level to end you. No one will stop me and I will face no repercussions. The halfling quit struggling and gulped. Good. Now here we are. The group pulled into the town stable, a huge thing due to the number of travelers who came to try the dungeon. It only took a moment for a simpering stable master to find the Inquisitor and offer the group their best horses. 5 minutes later the group galloped out of town and rode through the surrounding forest until they came upon the Inquisitor's intended destination, the dungeon. They tied down their mounts outside and entered on foot. Not that I'm complaining, but would somebody tell me why we are here? How am I supposed to know what I'm tracking if I don't know what I'm tracking? I'm pretty good, but I'm not that good, grumbled the halfling. They were descending one of the massive stairs that lead between floors as he spoke. Byra paused then nodded. You are here to track down a new monster that has been reported on as of recent events. Black fur, wolf-like, bipedal. Alright, I can work with that. There are no wolves in this dungeon, nearest would be mountain wolves, but they are 100 miles away at least, so if it really is wolf-like as you say, then its tracks should be distinct from everything else in this dungeon. Anything else? She paused. It's reported to be drenched entirely in blood. Really? That's a bit gruesome. You know I'm not much good in a fight, right? You better protect my half-ass. Myself and Drumus are enough to deal with any threat. The halfling eyed the Minotaur. I suppose that is comforting. Anyway, I have a skill that gives me an enhanced sense of smell. If this monster really is covered in blood as you say, then I should be able to smell it. They went on in silence until Byra held up an armored hand. We're here. This is the floor it was last sighted on. Come, it should be in this direction. Be aware of your surroundings. This new potential monster is not the only threat in the dungeon. Yeah, I know, monsters, dungeon shit, whatever, said the Minotaur, picking his teeth with a knife. Hey, said the halfling. I can already smell something, come on, just follow me. The group followed as the halfling led the way through twisting passages until at last they exited onto a sandy causeway tunnel lit by moonlight, much broader than the ones they had arrived through. A medley of footprints marked the sand as though many webbed feet had passed by. HRMM. Looks piscine. I know there are some lake tribes around here. Guess they must come through here for whatever reason. Oh. I found something. This might be it. Exclaimed Jilly, pointing at a footprint. The halfling shuffled over and peered down. Curious. What is it? There are two sets, both with wolf-like aspects. One was made a little after the other. The odd thing is that the newer set is from a larger pair of paws. He got down on his knees and stared closely at the two, switching between them every so often. If I were an inferior tracker, I would tell you that we are facing two of this monster. But these paws are functionally identical. They do not have any of the micro-deviations in anatomy that occur between different people of a single species. Oh, stop trying to make yourself look good and get to the damn point, halfling, grumbled Drumus. The halfling glared at him irritably. It's the same monster but grown larger. Byra crossed her arms. HRMM. I know, it sounds strange. I suspect we are against a monster that is absurdly quickly growing in size. There was speculation of something like this in the report. It seems like this could indeed become a problem if left alone. Very well, please continue. The halfling finished his inspection of the tracking and gestured for them to follow. He led them further down the tunnel, then round a corner. He paused. That blood smell, it's gotten, quite strong. You think the monster is near? No, this is too strong a smell for just one monster. I'm not sure what it is exactly I'm smelling. They continued onward, passing by a part of the tunnel closed off by piled-up rocks. They slowed as they came across a gap in the sand. Gods. The smell. It's so strong. I believe it's coming from that chasm. The group edged nearer and peered over the edge. What is that? Is that all blood? Said Jilly, her face paling. Dear gods, it's like someone painted the floor and walls in the stuff. How many must have died for this? More importantly, where are the bodies? I don't like this. We should go, whispered Jilly. Wait, hold on, where's the Minotaur? Byra blinked at the halfling and turned from the hole to look behind. No Minotaur. That idiot probably got bored and wandered off to take a nap. You're a tracker, aren't you? Let's retrace our steps and see where we got separated. They edged away from the hole, perhaps a little too thankful to no longer be near it, and began to make their way back. It wasn't long before the halfling found hoof prints, and indeed they diverged from their path and went down a dark side tunnel. I'm going to strip a line of hide out of that Minotaur when I find him, growled Byra. I just want to find him again. I don't like these gloomy caves, shivered Jilly. The trio entered the narrower, near pitch-dark passage. They had no lantern as the Minotaur had taken it with him. It wasn't long before they started to hear something. Crying. The halfling and inquisitor exchanged a puzzled glance, then crept around the corner. A goblin sat against the wall, hugging its legs and openly weeping. Look, that goblin is a slave, see the slave collar? Che. Maybe this is what drew Drumus's attention. Well, why isn't he here? I don't know, asked the goblin. Fosco gave her an annoyed look but crept toward the crying goblin. Hey, goblin girl, did you happen to see a Minotaur come by here? The goblin looked up at the halfling with bloodshot, crazed eyes. He ate them, he ate everyone. He's going to eat us. He's coming to eat us all. The goblin shrieked and darted into a crack in the wall, disappearing from sight. Oh, okay, said the halfling in the still silence that followed. See, can we go? Keened Jilly. No, look, there are tracks over here. Fosco, come look, said the inquisitor. I hate to admit it, but I'm starting to get just a little unsettled. Maybe the girl is right. Just look, sighed the inquisitor. The halfling grumbled and stepped over and began tracking. He beckoned the others to follow. He paused after a few meters. Something happened here. It looks like there was a struggle. Wait, I see blood. The group moved warily forward, and out of the gloom a bloody track appeared, a gouge in the sand as though a large body had been dragged. Then it stopped. Byra leant down and picked up the Minotaur's mace. It, along with a few pieces of the Minotaur's armor and clothing, lay scattered around a patch of blood and gore. There was nothing else. This is bad, isn't it? This is really bad, whimpered Jilly. Byra said nothing but drew her longsword and looked around, staring into the darkness. We need to leave. Now, said the halfling, his voice strained. Start retreating. Carefully. If you see anything, call out. They began to shuffle backwards, weapons drawn and pointing outward. The dark was quiet and oppressive. I think something is wrong, said the halfling, pausing. What? Forget it, we're leaving. The halfling turned and looked at the other two. He gulped. I can still smell Drumus's blood nearby. A set of teeth appeared from the dark and closed on the back of the halfling's head side on. His skull immediately collapsed under the pressure, his face grossly distending as his head was crushed inward. One of his eyeballs burst from his eye socket as it caved in and landed on Jilly's cleavage. The trainee inquisitor screamed her lungs out and fled into the darkness as fast as her legs could carry her. A long sword that was now glowing a faint blue suddenly thrust through the air as though propelled by a bolt of lightning. It pierced through the halfling's head and almost skewered the shadowy creature on the other side, if not for it moving at the last possible moment. It disappeared back into the dark. Byra withdrew her blade and let the tracker's corpse flop to the ground. She eyed the shadows. I've heard you can speak, monster. A deep bass growl of anger was her reply, so deep and heavy that the very air vibrated and Byra could feel it trembling the ground through her boots. The sound echoed around the tunnel, giving it an unclear origin. Angry. You do not like the one who told me that, do you? Do not worry, I will end your life and relieve you of your grudge. You can try. Graveled a deep voice. Motion in the corner of her eye made her move, and she twisted her sword up just in time. The creature's teeth momentarily bit down on her blade before it let go. She twisted her weapon and slashed, scoring a minor hit. A spray of blood and a shallower cut than expected. Tough body, resistant to blades. The creature vanished back into the shadows. She held her sword up in one hand, tracking where she thought it fled. Her eyes momentarily crossed her blade and she was surprised to see teeth marks on the steel somehow, despite the spells she had cast on it to strengthen and sharpen the metal. Its teeth are extremely hard, shocking jaw strength. A scuffing sound from behind and she spun. A knife flew out of the gloom aimed at her head. She parried it, sending it flying through the air to clatter against the cave wall. It uses weapons? No, doesn't fit, this is a trap. She swung her sword and twisted around as bloody teeth lunged at the back of her neck. Her sword arm came up, but too late to hit, only enough to block. The brutal trap of its maw came down on her forearm. Teeth dented metal and she looked on in shock as her prided vambraces abruptly buckled under its jaws, an unstoppable bite pressing down with such force that the squealing, deforming metal dug deep into her arm. She screamed and thrashed as skin and flesh and muscle was squeezed apart under the unstoppable pressure. Her sword dropped from her hand as she lost feeling, clanging as it hit the sand. She pounded at the monster's head with her free fist, but nothing slowed it. Her bones began to splinter, then split apart as the squeezing force of her own vambrace ground them down. The monster base growled and savaged her arm, shaking its head and violently dragging her. Byra desperately tried to resist, but the breathtaking agony was causing her to falter. She set her teeth. It wasn't going to let her go. No choice. She slapped her hand down on the vambrace and twisted it, then kicked out at the monster. Her arm felt like it was on fire, but with a wordless scream and the grisly sickening parting of flesh, she pulled a ragged shredded stump free from her vambrace. The monster gave her a look of surprise before she pulled a device from her belt, closed her eyes and threw it to the ground. An explosive, ear-shattering sound and an eye-searing flash of light, and the monster yelped. The inquisitor opened her eyes. Her ears were ringing, but she could see well enough in the dark to run and escape down the tunnel away from the thing that had maimed her. She cradled the ruin of her arm as she fled and promised revenge, no, extermination. Chapter 23. Rain sucked in air through his teeth and picked at the wound the inquisitor had given him, a shallow slice that ran from his shoulder down to his elbow. It oozed blood. Who was that leveler? An inquisitor. I've heard of her. She's new to the local dungeon town. Dangerous. Inquisitors are known to hold grudges, so she will probably try and come for me again. HRMM. Too bad that minotaur stumbled upon us. Stupid noisy goblin slave. They saw what we did to the peace scene and they knew about me, so they needed to die. The minotaur was bad luck though, or maybe good luck, we did need to separate them. Did the goblin slave get away? Yes, said Opal, looking annoyed. I had to get out of sight quickly and I accidentally dropped the chain. They could be anywhere in these tunnels by now. Rain shrugged but then got to his feet. Having eaten the Minotaur, he now towered over Opal at an intimidating 7 foot tall, the top of her head only coming up to around the bottom of his ribcage. The Minotaur had been unlucky. Unaware Rain was there, he had crouched down to talk to the goblin slave, the perfect opportunity for Rain to put his nearly unstoppable bite to use. The back of the Minotaur's neck had lasted only a moment under his jaws. I had better eat the kobold slaves if I'm going to speed recovering this wound. Well, we have the halfling in this too, you know, said Opal, waving the severed arm of the Inquisitor and letting the hand and fingers flop around. Rain blinked down at it. The arm, or rather, hand and half a forearm, was encased in black metal armor decorated with gold. The segmented fingers of the gauntlet were incredibly intricate and beautifully crafted to provide maximum flexibility and protection. He snorted. Yeah, it's important to finish a meal, I guess. See if you can get it out of the shell. Opal dropped herself down on the ground to sit cross-legged and began poking around and fiddling with the armor. Meanwhile, Rain picked up the longsword the Inquisitor had dropped in the sand. The blade was still glowing a faint blue but was rapidly dimming as the spells on it faded away. The sword was exquisite, just like the armor, with a heavy ruby in the pommel and a worm curling around the grip, its wings outstretched to form the crossguard. He nibbled on his lip. Something was bothering him. This was some awfully ornate-looking gear even for an Inquisitor. It appeared to be more the sort of thing a noble would carry. He recalled the black horns on the Inquisitor's head, a sign of her being some kind of half-breed. He knew little of her when he was human. She had only arrived at the town of Lynthia recently, not enough time for rumors to filter down to the cast-offs of society. He considered that the Inquisitor could come after him a lot harder than he might expect. Well, she can come if she wants. I just need to get bigger and stronger faster than she can keep up with. Speaking of which, he turned and dove on the halfling tracker the Opal had conveniently already stripped. It didn't take long to make his way through the diminutive body, and soon there was nothing left but a bloody smear in the sand. Rain groaned as he felt himself get a little taller. A respectable 7 foot and a little bit of an inch. He was increasingly finding he had to eat more and more to gain height, each gained inch of height requiring more and more body mass, he assumed. Halfling is pretty good, but I've got to deduct points for not being a full portion despite having the tastiness boost of being a leveler, he said, scratching his jaw. Aha! Said Opal as a clicking sound signified she had figured out the trick to opening the ornate armor. She peeled off the gauntlet, revealing the pale hand beneath, and then tugged it free from the vambrace with difficulty as it was still partially trapped under the crushed metal. She cheekily stuck her tongue out. Here you go, Wolfie, I've got a treat for you. She tossed the arm upward and Rain snapped it from the air on instinct. He froze. Opal blinked at him. You okay? Rain's jaws slowly began moving and his eyes rolled up. So good, he moaned. What even is this? His ears folded down and his tail wagged of its own accord. His taste buds ignited as the lush sensation spread. He actually had difficulty moving his jaw just from the sheer overwhelming flavor. It's like the most savory yet richest meat I've ever eaten. Dear gods, it's melting in my mouth. Are you messing with me? No. It's something about the meat. He closed his eyes as the last of it slipped down his gullet. Rank 1 food? No, I might need to make a new special rank for this. Oh, it's good for growth too, said Rain, rolling his shoulders as his body grew a little once more. Opal tilted her head to the side. Now you've made me regret giving it to you instead of keeping it for myself. Why was it special? You've eaten levelers before. He shook his head as though to clear his overwhelmed senses. It's that Inquisitor, she wasn't entirely human. I know whatever made up her other part, it was special, just tasting that mere fraction of it. Gods, I want to eat whatever species that is. Rain considered just what the Inquisitor could partly be. Most obvious was Drake or Wyverling, which would be fitting for the sword. Perhaps even a rare breed of Minotaur or Gotrian would cause those horns, or maybe even a drag, but no, that couldn't possibly be. Could it? HRMM. Well, too late to chase her down now, and that other human that ran off screaming has vanished, so I guess you'll have to make do. Rain sighed and felt a little depressed to his surprise. Just the thought of not getting more immediately was almost too much to bear. Fine, if I can't have quality, then I'll just have to settle for quantity. Where can I find lots and lots of monsters to eat, Opal? I need to eat and become stronger. Well, the Piscine seem to have abandoned this floor. Disappearing one of their armies would do that. I do know of somewhere we could try, not far, lots of food, but it might be very dangerous. Alright, Let's see if we can scout it out. He handed over the longsword to the goblin, who attached it to the top of her pack. She now had 3 swords, a cutlass and a rapier, one at each hip, plus the new longsword. They left the darkened tunnel and found themselves by the 2 remaining kobold slaves that Opal had chained up. The 2 kobolds looked up at Rain with fear, backing away nervously. That fear was not without reason. I helped you with your trap. You've got to let me live. Look, eat this guy, he's way tastier than I am, just look how fat and obese his tail is, said the red-scaled kobold. The fat-tailed kobold screamed in outrage at this and attacked the red-scaled kobold, clawing at his face before a massive paw came down on his shoulder and pulled him back into Rain's jaws, swiftly ending his life. He ate him from top to bottom entirely, fat tail included. He checked his injury and noted it was gradually starting to heal. Listen, I can help. Just let me live, please, said the remaining kobold. Sorry Scaly, big and hungry over here already has me, said Opal, picking under her nails with her knife. Rain paused and glared at the kobold. How? How? Stammered the kobold. I can see carry stuff. Rain snorted, then laughed aloud. Opal gave Rain a scathing look. He has a point and your pack is getting kind of full, said Rain, giving her a pointed look in return. Besides, it makes it harder for you to do important stuff lugging that around. GRR. Okay fine. Don't make me regret this, you scaly bastard. She dumped her rucksack and removed the longsword which she strung across her back. Then she grabbed the chains that the other 2 slaves had been wearing and formed an extra long chain with which to use on the newly promoted pack kobold. I won't disappoint you. You can count on me to provide top-tier stuff-carrying services, said the suddenly hysterically happy kobold. If you try to run away I will eat you while you're still alive so you can watch it happening, growled Rain. The kobold let out a little high-pitched squeak and hurried to hide behind Opal. The group set off into the cave system, with Opal leading the way. Soon they left the area that the Piscine liked to inhabit and were moving into a more green and plant-filled cave biome. Grass began to carpet the tunnel floors and vines were strung across the walls and overhead. It wasn't long before they came across an exceptionally lush and beautiful cavern. White crystals embedded in the ceiling cast the room in picturesque natural light. What halted Rain in his tracks though was the crystal clear and shining pool of water in the middle of the cavern. Oh! We're stopping here. Wait, what, why? Cried Opal. Bath. Opal looked over herself. Filthy and splattered in blood. Then she looked at Rain. Absolutely drenched in blood. But we're both perfectly clean. We don't need nasty water on us. Rain's brow rose at that. You know it's not surprising goblins have a bad reputation. I'm not going in. No way. Rain picked her up and held her over his head, kicking and screaming. He marched down to the lake and dropped down the kobold's chain, then kicked a boulder over it to keep it in place. Stop. Let me down. Kobold slave, I demand you stop him. The kobold looked up at the goblin as though she had just told him that monsters and levelers could all live in harmony, in other words, bonkers crazy talk. I'm moving this up the chain of command, that would be your call, your wolfliness, pleased and teep, said the kobold as he ducked behind the boulder. Mew-o! Cried Opal as Rain took a running leap and cannonballed into the lake with a kersplush. The goblin spluttered to the surface and spat water. Why do you do this? This is the worst. Because it's good to be clean, he said as he grabbed her and dunked her below the surface. He held her down as he tore all her clothes off before letting her swim back to the surface. You're so mean about it too. She pouted, her cheeks coloring. Rain simply grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her away from the massive discolored patch of water they had created. He then began rubbing her down with his paw pads, scrubbing her skin clean through dint of effort. He didn't even pretend shame and squeezed and pawed at her chest before moving on to the next part. Even her privates did not escape this treatment, and the goblin made her gasps quite verbal. At last he came to her hair and ran his claws through her black locks over and over as she sat in his lap until it was as clean as he could manage. The goblin looked over her spotlessly clean body and scowled. Rain lazed in the water and casually ran his paws over this own fur. He gave her the side eye. You're going to need to get used to it. I intend to bathe you every single opportunity possible. Gra! Said the goblin, slamming her fists in the water. She turned on Rain. Fine. But this isn't going to be one-sided. She leapt on the wolf and began furiously rubbing his chest fur. Rain simply continued cleaning his arms and pretended not to notice. Her hands worked their way down his torso and abs until they were touching up to his oversized sheath. It had grown enormously since last time she had been with him, enough that she couldn't even get her hands around it. A lewd leer crossed her face as she began to fondle and rub at him, her breath coming in pants as her cheeks reddened. A huge paw came down and enclosed her hands, however. We're about to attack some very dangerous monsters. Remember what happened last time? After the mushrooms? You couldn't walk straight for a full night and then you got kidnapped by slavers when your legs turned to jelly at the worst possible moment. The goblin made a strangled scream and slammed her small fists down on his thighs before flouncing away. Rain sighed and relaxed back into his bathing routine. Half an hour later he emerged from the lake and shook himself dry, his glossy clean black fur gleaming in the cavern light. He had the kobold go and fetch Opal's clothing from the water and then he hung the clothing over a bush to dry. A little later he found Opal sulking and throwing pebbles in the lake. She looked up at him as though expecting a talk. Instead, he picked her up and put her over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes and marched back to her clothing while she swore up a storm. When she refused to put on clothes he began dressing her himself. He held her arms up in the air in one paw and carefully wrapped her chest with the other. Then lifted her off the ground and put her legs in the holes of her shorts before ramming them up, causing her to yelp. The goblin looked like she was about to explode and her face was blushing bright red. Rain graveled a laugh. You wanted me to do that, didn't you? Opal opened her mouth to angrily retort, paused, closed it, and bit her lip. She turned away as she reached new never-before-known heights of blushing. The group set off and Opal, trying to avoid looking Rain in the eye, led the way. Chapter 24. This tribe is one my old tribe sometimes. Fought. There was always lots of bad blood between us, that's normal for gobos, but recently they started to win all of the battles. Really? What changed to make your tribe start losing? Opal pursed her lips. Half-goblins. Rain tilted his head. As in half-goblin and half. Something else. Yes, they aren't picky. Look. She pointed from where they hid upon a rock shelf overlooking a cavern filled with lush foliage and jungle trees. A sandy dirt road of sorts wound through the center of it and ended at the entrance to another cavern. To either side of the entrance were a pair of guards holding spears. They were taller than the average goblin. At first Rain had thought they were hobgoblins, but on closer inspection he realized that they had non-goblin features. One had some human-like features, tall, a beard, long black hair, hairy arms and chest. The other had the upper body of a particularly large goblin, but its lower body was that of a snake, a lamia. They look strong. Why didn't they conquer your tribe? We've fought half-gobbo tribes before. I even have some tribal memories of past gobbos doing it. The reason that smart gobbos don't make their tribes into half-gobbo tribes is because they always die out, they go extinct. We just needed to outlast and avoid this one and the problem would take care of itself. Rain furrowed his brow. Really? Why would they die out? Think about it. A bunch of half-breeds are born who are stronger than regular gobbos. What happens? They take over the tribe. Then to keep the half-gobbo faction strong and in control they breed with more non-gobbos. If they are breeding with strong monsters they eventually kill the regular gobbos and split up because they are not tribal monsters. If they are breeding with levelers, sooner or later a half who can level is born who then takes over the tribe from the half-breeds. The leveler eventually kills every monster in the tribe for levels as levelers do, then leaves for the surface. You wouldn't think it would be that way every time, but it always is. Half-gobbo tribes get outbred and burn out. I suppose it would have to have happened that way or there would be no regular goblin tribes left. Opal began pulling things from the rucksack the kobold carried. I used to scout this place sometimes for the tribe, keeping an eye on what they were doing. I think we can take it, but I need some information. She pulled out a simple brown traveling coat with a hood that had belonged to the halfling tracker, then removed her swords and jacket and swept the coat over herself. She then grabbed a palmful of dust and dirt and rubbed it over her face. I'm going inside to see. What? No way. That's far too dangerous. The goblin snorted. I'm just another little gobbo to the halves. They won't give a shit, it'll be fine. It's too risky. You want to eat and become strong. You said yourself that Inquisitor is going to come for you. You have to be ready. Just be careful, said Rain, sighing. Opal flashed him a white-toothed grin. Easy. Now watch. Wait, you can't leave me alone with him," whimpered the kobold, chained to a rock behind them. Opal flatly ignored that and slipped down from the rock shelf and disappeared into the jungle foliage, climbing down a tree to reach the ground. Rain watched silently as the hooded figure of Opal made her way out of the brush and onto the road and then hiked her way up it to the round opening guarded by the two half-goblins. They pointed their spears at her and barked a command. Rain nearly leapt off the shelf to go after her but with difficulty managed to control himself, his claws scoring the stone as he held himself back. Opal meanwhile put on an act filled with simpering body language. She nearly fell to her knees, she was so supplicant, repeatedly nodding her head and pleading with her hands. One of the halves eventually laughed and shook his head. He knocked the other's spear aside and she was allowed in. She entered through the circular tunnel and disappeared. Rain leant back against the rock with a sigh. He rested his arm on his knee and settled in to wait. About an hour later she returned and scrabbled back up the tree and leapt onto the shelf, discarding the cloak. "Okay. I got what I needed. This should be easy breezy. Probably. Maybe. Hopefully. I think. What did you see?" "A big cavern, but not open, it's nearly all filled with trees as I thought. That's what makes me think we can do this. All the trees mean they can't fight in a big group or find us easily. Makes sense. I can probably take on any goblin or half-goblin one-on-one, just not the whole tribe at the same time." "Exactly. The only problem is that gobbo tribes always have multiple escape routes, it's how you got into my old tribe's camp, remember? So while we can get in and take out a few of them, most of the tribe will flee and vanish into the dungeon if they think they can't win." Rain snorted. "You found all the escape tunnels, didn't you?" "Yes. There's 3 of them, not many, but this is a very defensive tribe for gobbos. They made a lot of enemies by being so aggressive and bloodthirsty. We sneak in, block all the exits, then kill the tribe bit by bit while they have no escape." "You're getting scarily good at thinking up traps." She grinned. "I know." Then pursed her lips. "Though there are some strong-looking half-gobbos in there. This gobbo tribe is wow, so slutty. They really banged anything they could get their grubby little hands on." Opal grabbed the kobold's chain and they slipped down into the jungle. They didn't take the road but slunk through the dark, shadowy jungle following the wall of the cavern. Ahead Rain saw the 2 guards, this time from the side and close up. They were on a slight rise but not far from the edge of the foliage they hid under. "You need to kill them both quick, can't let them get inside and call the alarm." Rain nodded his agreement and set his feet, half crouched and ready. Opal watched until they seemed particularly distracted, both talking to each other and looking away from where they hid, and then she dropped the hand she was holding up. Rain moved. His feet drove down into the soil so hard it compressed beneath them. He exploded out of the foliage like a demonic shadow, his paws came down on the Lamia goblin's shoulders and his jaws snapped shut on his neck like a bear trap, instantly severing his spine. He rode the falling corpse to the ground and keeping his momentum fell on the second guard as they started to scream, holding their spear up to try to defend themselves. Rain jabbed him in the gut, ending the scream in a gargle, then he grabbed his head and forcefully twisted, snapping his neck. The human goblin flopped to the ground dead. Opal emerged from the foliage with the kobold and slunk up by the side of the round tunnel to look in. After a moment she sighed in relief. "No one's coming, looks like that scream wasn't heard, there's still no one there. Here, let's take them inside." Each grabbed a guard by the arms and they dragged them through the short 2-meter tunnel. On the other side trees and bushes grew up close and they found a tree surrounded with dense foliage a little away from the entrance. To the kobold's horror he was tied to the tree with the 2 half-goblins either side of him. He gave the 2 corpses a wide-eyed look. "Why, you're just going to leave me here? With these?" "Yup," said Opal brightly. They returned back to the tunnel. On this end of the tunnel was a massive thick stone disc to one side. Pegs were driven through a section of the disc with which ropes had been attached and left to dangle. "This is the main door thing." They all heave on the ropes and pull the disc over the entrance, blocking it off when they need to defend from other monsters or levelers or monster tribes. Rain examined the disc and then stepped to one side and set his shoulder against it. He then heaved. His feet slid against the ground as he strained, but after a moment the disc began to ever so slowly move, inch by inch, then picking up speed it rolled over the entrance, sealing it off. Opal drew her cutlass and then hacked all of the ropes attached to the pegs until there was nothing remaining. While Opal was doing that, Rain found a wedge-shaped rock and together with another rock he hammered it under one side of the disc using his abundance of strength, ensuring it was nigh impossible to remove. Opal gave him a thumbs up and they dashed off into the jungle. She led them around the perimeter until they came across a hole in the ground. Got any ideas? Rain scratched his chin and frowned, looking around. He then looked at a nearby tree growing next to the cavern wall. He moved up to it and tried pushing the trunk to no avail. He then tried wrapping his arms around it and heaving. It moved, but only a little. Frustrated, he climbed between the tree and the wall and pulled up his feet against the bark. Then using the wall as leverage, he shoved outward with all his might. He snarled and pushed himself to the limit. The tree cracked, and then with a groan it began to fall, finally crashing down over the hole and blocking it with its trunk. He couldn't have imagined doing something like this when he had first stumbled ashore on the Great Lake starving and soaked. He'd come a long way, his strength outpacing even his size. Opal jumped around the trunk trying to see if she could slip down any gap. She could not and gave Rain the nod before they moved on. They were about to leave when a goblin dashed out of the jungle. Hey, what was that noise? Wait, what is that monster you got with you? Opal froze before quickly shifting disposition and making placating gestures. I was coming back with a new nice monster for the tribe to breed with, and this tree fell on the hole I came in through just as I was getting out. Really? Huh. Lucky you didn't get squashed. Wait, why are you so clean apart from your face? She rolled her eyes. It's embarrassing, but if you must know, I tripped and fell in a lake. I've only just got around to reapplying some nice dirt. The goblin eyed her suspiciously. I don't know, that sounds kinda gurk. Opal stabbed him in the neck several times, then dragged his body under a bush. Did that goblin really just find the fact that you are clean more suspicious than the fact you have a monster like me with you? Said Rain in disbelief. You wouldn't get it. It's a gobbo thing. She grabbed his paw and pulled him back into the jungle. They quickly found the second escape tunnel. This one was more easily blocked with a nice nearby pile of rocks. They shoved and heaved them into the hole, filling the bottom of it. Soon enough they were on the way to the third potential escape route, having yet to see another goblin. That luck abruptly came to an end, however, as the final escape tunnel was right next to a camp of half-goblins. Chapter 25. Rain carefully parted the large leaves of a plant he was hiding behind and peered out at the camp. The word monstrous seemed particularly apt for what he saw sitting around the campfire. Half-goblins. But the term didn't quite represent the abomination of it. Nearest were a pair of lamia goblins, large goblins with the lower bodies of giant snakes, their flesh transitioning into green and black scale at the hip. Their broad lower bodies knotted and curled around each other in a heap. Next to them was a male human goblin, taller, bearded, and with long hair, which of course was an unusual sight for a male goblin, as normally only female goblins had hair. His hand rested on the back of a dire dog goblin, a creature that was singularly disturbing to look at. A large quadrupedal furless dog with two heads, except where there would normally be dog heads there was a pair of goblin heads, and where its skin would normally be black it was instead a dirty green with black markings. One of the heads gnawed on a bone while the other talked with the human goblin. Opposite from Rain and Opal and across the fire was an absolutely massive bear-like creature, a cave bear if Rain had to guess, 9 foot tall and incredibly broad. Its fur was dark green with slashes of black and its claws yellowed. Its head, framed by a large mane of fur, was goblinoid but more feral-looking and elongated than any goblin Rain knew, with oversized triangular teeth that didn't fit in its mouth and faintly glowing red eyes. Long lank black hair hung over its eyes and head in strands, giving it an unsettling appearance. A number of regular goblins were huddled around the fire as well. They did not look particularly happy to be there. One of the lamia goblins spat in the fire, causing it to sputter. Hey, grumbled the human goblin. I'm cooking on that fire. The lamia goblin laughed. Maybe it'll add flavor, gods know it needs it with your cooking. Looking to start something, you slippery bitch? It won't end well for you. It's not like your mother will notice another dead lamia with the number of eggs she shits out. There's always a spare to replace you. The lamia goblin flicked her forked tongue out. You're right, mother doesn't care. But she doesn't care about most things these days, apart from where the next dozen dicks are coming from, which, by the way, is still better than your mother who can't even string 2 words together. The human goblin held up a rusty knife. Watch your forked tongue, snake. I won't hear a word against her. TCH. Delusional. Oh, do shut up, said one of the heads of the dire dog goblin. At least your mother can speak and has some basic reasoning ability. When I met my father he tried to eat me. Yeah, that's pretty rough. Not to mention the two heads thing. The dire dog sniffed. Ah, well, at least Clarence understands not to bite me. Most of the time. The second goblin head on the dire dog looked up at the first with the bone still in its mouth. The dire dog goblin's tail wagged. I can't stay mad at you, said the first head affectionately. I miss my mother, gravelled the cave beer goblin, its sad eyes peeking between its lank hair. Your mother was a disaster. I told those idiots we needed to make stronger chains. Did they listen? Of course not. And then the damn thing escaped and killed a dozen gobos before running off into the dungeon. Yeah, well, probably for the best. You would not believe the number of gobos that died trying to do the deed with her. It's a fucking bear, what did they expect? I don't know, to not get turned into a bear snack. Ah, it's just basic gobos who gives a shit. Look. The second Lamia goblin leaned over and grabbed a regular goblin. The goblin screamed as it was dragged up into the air but was unable to do a thing as the Lamia goblin's jaw unhinged and then yawned unexpectedly horrifyingly wide. The goblin was pushed inside and then disappeared from view as the Lamia noisily swallowed it down. The goblin sank downward as a large bump in the Lamia's throat, then body end. Then tail where it came to a stop. The Lamia burped and then glared at the regular goblins. Want to make a fuss? The regular goblins shook their heads in fear and huddled closer to each other. Good. Know your betters. Don't bully them, gravelled the cave beer goblin, its sad eyes turning on the goblin eating Lamia. Oh, not this again, said the first Lamia who had not partook of goblin. Look, you guys can hammer out whether it's bad to eat them or whatever, I'm going to the toilet. The Lamia goblin uncoiled herself from her brother and slipped over to the jungle right where Rain and Opal were hiding. The pair shuffled backwards in alarm. Luckily the Lamia missed them and glided by. Opal raised her eyebrows at Rain and he got the message. They slunk after her. The Lamia muttered to herself and seemed to be examining trees. This went on until she came to a tree that she seemed to approve of. She looked up at it and sighed. Fucking leggy bastards have it so good. If only they knew how much of a pain in the tail it is to pass water with a body like this and not get any on you. She shook her head, then pulled herself up and over a low-hanging branch so that her front was facing the ground and her hips rested on it. Ah, that should be good. Oh gods, who is that? Hey, I can hear you, you know. Do you mind? I'm trying to go here. Rain walked around from behind her and looked at the awkwardly compromised Lamia goblin hanging over the branch, her head at a height with Rain's. Hi. Can I, help you? Rain pulled back his lips showing his teeth. Wah. His jaws flashed through the air and he tore out her throat. The Lamia goblin gurgled blood and her eyes rolled back as she slumped over the branch like a wet rope. Opal rested a hand on the snake part of the Lamia's body and chewed her lip, thinking. I'm wondering if we didn't so much trap them in here with us but trap ourselves in here with them. That cave beer or whatever goblin is huge and very strong looking. It's not too late, we could still escape. Rain snorted. Hell no, I came to eat and grow strong or die trying. I want the strength to punish those who wronged me. I want to frighten the arrogant and slaughter those who would try to stop me. I want the size to terrify those who I injure so that they never come back. I want to eat this entire tribe. Opal smiled then laughed. Well, alright, you've convinced me. They crept back to the camp where the other half-goblin monsters rested. The remaining Lamia goblin was busy arguing with the cave beer goblin and getting increasingly angry as the cave beer goblin was implacable. I've already told you, get it into your thick skull, basic gobos are our lessers. If they weren't then we wouldn't have been able to take over the tribe with such ease. They basically worship us for God's sake. Not better. Same. Look at you, you're like 10 times their size at least. You could roll over and kill one in your sleep. Hell, I've seen what you do when we raid gobbo tribes. They're basically insects to you. Not insects. Same. Be good. I am good, I minus. The cave beer suddenly held up one claw-filled paw. The group stared at her. Something wrong. The Lamia goblin was completely thrown off and could only look at her with his mouth hanging open. Hey, didn't she say something like that just before her mother escaped? Said the dire dog goblin. What? The Lamia looked down and blinked. It's just something she said. Hey, where did your sister go? She's taking kind of a while. HMPF. Not long for a lamia, you wouldn't believe how much a pain in the tail it is to minus. The cave beer goblin suddenly stood up to the surprise of the group. What's she doing? I don't know, do I? Maybe she's going to check on sis. Would you lot calm down? I'm trying to cook here. Let the damned bear have her way, grumbled the human goblin. The group watched in silence as the cave beer goblin strode around the fire and toward where Rain and Opal were secreted. She delicately pushed apart the foliage and peered down. Rain dropped on her head from the tree he had climbed and tried to bite down on her neck. Unfortunately, he'd underestimated her. The bear whipped her head back before Rain could get a real bite on her broad neck, and she flung herself down, rolling onto her back. Rain looked to his side in surprise as a pair of cave beer feet hurtled toward him and belted into his stomach with a thump. With a whoosh of released breath, he was launched into the air toward the camp. He came down rolling but not stunned. He turned the roll into a half-leap, half-flail and landed on top of the human goblin. The human goblin yelped and they both went sprawling, rolling over each other and throwing wild blind punches. Blood flew through the air, but not Rain's. The human goblin was having difficulty harming Rain's tough body, and Rain swiftly pushed home his advantages. He grabbed the human goblin's arms and shoved them aside, stopping him from defending himself as he ripped his face off, spraying gore across the ground. The regular goblins took one look at this and ran screaming into the jungle. What is that thing? Fucking kill it, you useless bear. Save him, cried the lamia. The cave beer goblin roared and charged across the camp at Rain as the dire dog goblin barked at him, seemingly scared of coming closer. Rain snapped at it and it whined and backed away. No. Stop running away. Damn it, Clarence, yelled the head of the dire dog that could speak common to the head that could not. Rain didn't stop to hear more but flung himself at the cave beer, and then as its massive arms capped with 10-inch claws came at him, he dropped down and skidded between her legs, rolling back to his feet on the other side. The cave beer stumbled and nearly fell over herself. Rain set his feet to launch himself at her back, but suddenly coils of glossy black and green scale swept around him and looped up his body until he was entirely encased in snake body. The cave beer at last turned around and found the lamia looking smug. Got it. See, wasn't that hard? Why am I always the only competent one? Sigh. No idea what the fuck it is we caught, but I bet it's good breeding stock. I think I should get some pretty nice privileges from the chief from this, minus. The lamia suddenly froze and looked down. His mouth opened wordlessly and his eyes went round. Oh gods. It's eating me. Help. Help. Get it off. Get it off me. The lamia tried to uncoil itself, but black-furred arms and legs shot out from between the coils and held him in place as blood began to waterfall down from the gaps in his coils. The cave beer rushed up as the lamia started to thrash, and she tried to pull apart his tail from the black bloody shadow that was tearing the lamia apart from the inside. The lamia goblin, now wild-eyed and with blood pouring from his lips, began to shake and desperately clutch at the bear. Gee, get it out, kill it. The bear roared in frustration and panic as the lamia died, and she forced apart the coils only to find nothing. Then pain hit her, and she looked down to see black fur shifting against her own dark green and black fur. The creature had eaten its way through her stomach wall and was digging up into her body. The cave beer staggered backward, her lank hair flying as she shook her head. Large clumsy paws came down and tried to grab the monster, eating her from the insides, but its body was so slippery with blood that her paws simply slicked off. She sat down with a woof as the agony started to overwhelm her mind, and she went into shock. She put a paw on her chest as she felt the grinding, chewing jaws of the beast move toward her heart. Feels warm. She slowly lowered herself to the ground as her sight started to go dark. A few seconds later, a blood-drenched mass pulled itself from her stomach with a grisly sucking sound as gore and cave beer skin sloughed off. Rain shook himself, cleaning off the worst of it. Clarence. Rain looked up to see the dire dog goblin race past with a wild-eyed Opal riding on its back. She gripped its barrel with her legs, and then with her cutlass held in both hands she recklessly swung at the monster's heads. Missed. Swung again, and by some fluke managed to chop into the neck of one of them. The dire dog crashed to the ground as half its legs gave out. Opal rode it down as it slid to a stop. The remaining head whined in confusion and pain and licked the now still and dead head that once could speak. Be with your sibling, said Opal as she swiftly ended its life. She sighed. This whole tribe is just one big self-inflicted pile of nasty The fools should have taken our ancestors' warnings about making half-gobbo tribes seriously. They seem worse than your old tribe, but you pity them. Sheesh. Don't get me wrong, I'm still gonna kill them. They're bloodthirsty and aggressive and have butchered gobbo tribes. I've seen what's left of tribes they conquered. She shivered despite herself. Rain grunted but said nothing more. Instead he turned and grabbed the cave-beer goblin by the upper jaw and dragged her, with difficulty, across the grass until he came upon a hole in the ground, the third exit from the cavern. He pushed the massive corpse down into it, filling it and sealing it off. That's the last one. There's no passage out of this cavern now except for passage to the afterlife. Chapter 26. Those gobbos that fled screaming when you killed that human gobbo, well, I think the tribe knows we are here now, said Opal as voices and footsteps started to reach them from the surrounding jungle. That's fine, they won't know what's happening yet and it's too soon to have drawn the attention of many. Just need to keep on top of them as they come, said Rain wiping blood from his nose. Opal withdrew her rapier and scuttled under a nearby bush as Rain set his feet. All yours, big guy. Rain spread his paws as 2 lamia goblins exploded from the foliage followed by a dozen or so regular goblins. The 2 lamia didn't hesitate for a moment and dived on Rain using their bodies to engulf him entirely in an attempt to squeeze him to death. If only they had seen what had happened to the last one. Rain disappeared behind their scales as the goblins whooped their victory. It wasn't long before the screaming started. Blood sprayed from between the lamia's coils, shocking the goblins out of their celebration. Uncoil. Get it out, cried one lamia goblin as the surrounding goblins started to panic. I can't. Gobbos. Use your weapons, stab between our coils, go damn you. The crowd of goblins seized on the command and swarmed over the entwined lamia, using their poorly made swords and knives to poke between the slipping moving coils. It was working. More blood than ever was pouring out from between the coils. They were injuring it. Surely. A massive paw burst from the coils and wrapped around a goblin's head and then dragged him inside screaming. The goblins faltered. Another goblin was pulled inside, then another. Don't stop. You must save us. Please, said one of the lamia as they held the other up, blood pouring from their mouth. The goblins began to back away. What are you doing? Stop. Don't run. Oh gods, it's eating. Through my sp-. The lamia slumped to the ground as the goblins stepped back fearfully toward the trees. A blood-covered head burst from the lamia's flesh, causing the goblins to freeze in fright. It turned on them, its yellow eyes alight with hunger, tongue running along its teeth. Beast. Run. Squeaked one of the goblins as with a snarl Rain bounded from the lamia's corpses and gave chase. They fled into the jungle, the beast hot on their tails. It leapt and landed on a goblin, crushing it into the ground and instantly snapping its back with its weight. A paw lashed out and snatched up another goblin, bashing its brains out on a nearby tree. The chase continued, goblins dropping like flies as the beast outpaced them due to its longer legs. Soon enough only 3 desperate goblins remained, though not for long. A dark shadow loomed over the slowest of the goblins, but before it could reach out something cried out from above, an ear-splitting avian screech of a sound. The black-furred shadow tumbled to the ground as a pair of wings cannoned into it. A tall naked female goblin crashed into view, but instead of arms it had wings, and instead of goblin legs it had the feathered legs of a bird of prey, complete with oversized hooked talons made to rend flesh. It scratched and clawed at Rain as he rolled across the ground, keeping his arms up to protect his eyes. The harpy goblin avian screeched again, and it was joined by a second. They seized on Rain's shoulders, their talons puncturing his flesh. They then furiously flapped their wings. The harpy goblins slowly began to rise into the air, up above the foliage, above the jungle, where they were joined by more of their sisters, flapping and cawing. We have it, sisters. We have the intruder. The prize is ours. What a feral-looking beast. What creature would come to be if we were to breed with it, I wonder. We should take it to mother. He can be ours alone and strengthen our blood. All the better. The time we take over the tribe is near. We shall look down on our lessers from above as it is meant to be. A large paw wrapped around the leg of one of the carrying harpy goblins. She looked down in surprise that the creature could still move with their claws piercing it. Normally their prey was left in agony and unable to struggle. The paw's grip tightened, and to the harpy's shock she felt it drag her down. Hey. You're not supposed to do that. We'll fall. Yellow eyes looked up at her with contempt, and then its jaws opened and bit off her leg. She screamed and watched on in horror as her limb fell into the jungle canopy below. Drop it. Drop it. The mad beast is suicidal. I can't let it go. It's got my leg. Help me, sisters. Me too. Attack it. Rend its body to pieces. The two harpy goblins flapped desperately at the air, trying to keep aloft as the other harpy goblins flocked around them, their claws outstretched and slashing at the prey. Rain's foot lashed out, kicking at them and trying to keep them back, but there was only so much he could do, being attacked from both sides. Growling in frustration, he yanked down one of the harpies holding him up and bit through her neck, letting her drop. The harpy goblins cried out in anger and rushed him. His paw lashed out and wrapped around a harpy goblin's neck. Panicked eyes searched for help, but nothing could stop his inexorable strength, and the harpy was dragged into his jaws. Claws lacerated his body, but his paw reached out again, and then again. Harpy goblins were dropping one by one. Unfortunately, the one harpy goblin Rain was hanging onto wasn't enough to keep him aloft, and they were rapidly sinking into the treetops. A flash of green and the crash of branches, and they slammed back into the jungle. Rain had one momentary sight of a second cave bear goblin before he and the harpy collided with it at high speed. The three of them smashed into the ground, the harpy's wings audibly snapping as Rain rolled on top of her, crushing her between himself and the cave bear. The cave bear goblin roared in confusion and lashed out blindly with its massive claws. One swipe took the harpy goblin in the head and partially beheaded her. The next swipe came on, but Rain held up his paws and caught it, each paw gripping a massive 10-inch yellowed bear claw. He stumbled, nearly losing his footing atop the cave bear as the incredible strength of it slammed into him like a landslide. His feet dug into the cave bear's torso as he resisted, slowed, and then to the cave bear's surprise he managed to push back its paw. Rain took a step forward and twisted the arm of the cave bear down, forcing it into submission. Unfortunately for Rain, the monster had two paws and the other slashed up to eviscerate him. He was forced to release its paw as a set of yellow scythes whipped past his gut. He leapt backwards from its chest and landed back on the ground as it roared in fury, foam flecking from its lips. The cave bear goblin charged and Rain dived out of the way easily enough, the clumsy fury of the creature making it easy to predict. The hissing of a snake tugged at his ear and he tried to turn, but a moment too late. Coils lashed through the air and encircled his arms and legs from paw to shoulder and foot to hip and wrapped multiple times around his waist. He stared at the coils. More than one, more than two. In fact, as he looked over his shoulder he counted no less than 7 lamia goblins behind him, each using their tails to enwrap a different part of his body but far enough away from his head that he couldn't bite them. These lamia goblins had been informed of what he could do and had come prepared. He tried to move his arm, but the grip of 2 lamia heaved back, keeping him trapped. He snarled and leant into it, flexing his biceps and pecs. The lamia began to shift as they were dragged across the ground. He is too much to hold. We need more. To Rain's dismay, 2 more coils looped around his arms and dragged him back into the exposed position the lamia wanted him in. Hey, you! Cave bear gobbo. Get over here and gut this beast. I'm not sure how much longer we can hold him. The cave bear goblin who had been watching narrowed its eyes and began to step forward. Your mother, said Rain. The cave bear paused. Your mother, the true cave bear, was ashamed to have half-goblin trash for children. That's why she broke her chains and left, because she couldn't stand to look at the dog shit that had fallen out of her vagina. She hated you. The cave bear's eyes widened as though she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then, her whole body trembling, she spread her arms and roared in blood-spitting fury. Her eyes locked onto Rain and she charged. Hey, cave bear, this bastard is lying. Wait, no. No. Stop. Stoop. Screamed the lamia as the cave bear goblin freighted into them at full sprint. Rain, tangle of lamia, and furious cave bear crashed into each other, and the hissing, howling, roaring ball smashed aside trees as it rolled through the jungle. Blood spilled in the tangle's trail as a pair of unstoppable jaws flashed through the tumult, ripping and tearing and raising shrill screams as buckets of flesh were incised and separated. Giant bear claws ripped and tore, blind to friend or foe, only trying desperately to get at the slippery black shadow that squirmed between coils and cave bear. The shadow tore from the cave bear, then dived back into the coils as the bear tried to strike it, only hitting lamia instead. Blood and gore covered everything as the lamia started to disintegrate under the onslaught, their bodies mauled apart by the scything claws of the bear and the tearing of the wolf. The tangle of death slowed and the bear lost track of the wolf. Multiple holes punched in its stomach poured blood, but the mindless fury of the cave bear kept it frantically pulling apart coils and corpses. It wasn't until it felt the weight on the back of its neck did it realize its mistake. Too late. Immense pressure, pain, then the splintering crunch of a spine, no more pain. The cave beer goblin flopped on top of the horrific pile of shredded lamia. Rain rested on all fours atop the cave beer for a moment, breathing hard, his head bowed. Cutting it a bit close maybe, said a voice. He looked up to see Opal pushing aside some foliage. Blood spattered her clothes and both her cutlass and rapier were red up to the hilt. Yeah, well, they figured out engulfing me in coils was a bad idea. I couldn't bite my way out, so I had to change the situation. By having a half-cave beer land on you. Rain laughed. It works, didn't it? He said as he wiped gore from his face. Barely I-. Screw W. Rain turned back to the goblin as an actual full-blooded harpy, not a half-breed, crashed through the canopy and snatched Opal up in her talons. The harpy cackled and began to lift her into the air. Rain scrambled down the side of the bear and stumbled to his feet, shedding gore and blood with every motion. Opal! Roared Rain as the harpy made it past the canopy and began to glide over the jungle. Rain ran underneath her, following in her flight path. Daughters of mine. I have the traitor that's spoken of. Come see. Rain snatched up a stone about the size of a large fist from the ground as he ran. He leant backward, stretching his arm behind him, tilting his waist, then with a savage growl he torqued, twisting his hips and using all the momentum of his run he swung his arm so hard he thought it might snap. His paw whipped around and with a crack the rock left his paw and shot up through the canopy with an explosion of leaves. The rock took the harpy in the back of the head, sending a sprinkle of blood into the air. The harpy squawked and crashed back down through the canopy ahead of Rain. She hit the ground hard in a spray of dirt, her wing breaking beneath her as she landed atop it. The cries of many alarmed harpy goblins rang through the air as he raced up to the crashed true harpy. She was still alive, just moving groggily. Blood marked her pale naked skin and dripped from her long black hair, her red eyes were unfocused. Opal was lying near her, by some fluke having landed atop her then rolled away. Rain pulled the stunned goblin into his arms and checked her over. Amazingly she was unharmed. The cries of anger above the canopy were nearing, so he quickly thrust her out of sight beneath the nearest bush. The true harpy blinked and seemed to gather herself. She tried to move her broken wing and hissed in pain, then she painfully climbed to her feet. She touched the corner of her unharmed wing to the back of her head and it came away bloody. She eyed the red smear. You attacked a queen. That was a mistake. By harpy law I will see a hole cut in your navel and your intestine hooked free, then I will watch as my daughters nail the end to a tree, then chase you around it using a flaming branch until your bowels wrap round it like thread around a bobbin. You will then live like that until you begin to starve and become weak, upon which time we shall force feed you our guano until your stomach bursts. Rain wrinkled his nose and made a face of disgust. I think I understand why levelers hate harpies so much. You actually are the worst of what levelers say about monsters. The queen harpy hissed. And stepped forward. At ground level, and standing, she was at a height with Rain, much larger than any of the half-harpies, with massive brown and cream wings. Insolence. She strode forward, then sprinted, then leapt into the air feet first, her body parallel to the ground, her massive 12-inch razor talons aimed at Rain's face. Rain lunged forward and his paws slammed into the clawed feet of the harpy, arresting her momentum. The queen shrieked her fury and beat her one massive wing, blowing dust into the air, rippling the grass and shaking the trees. They wrestled, Rain's paws struggling to hold back the powerful kicks of the avian as her one good wing beat the air, keeping her aloft. As they fought and grappled, Rain began to be pushed back from the sheer wild strength of the queen, and around them harpy goblins descended through the canopy. This cavern will be mine, and every goblin and half-goblin will be my property. My army. You will not stop this, you cannot stop this, you cannot stop me. Roared the queen as her talons raked at Rain's forearms. No, came a voice, but I can. The inquisitor's long sword pierced through the back of the queen and burst up from her stomach on the other side, bright steel-coated red, a strange growth. The queen screamed and fell to the ground as Opal scrambled back between Rain's legs and under the bush. Rain stood over the queen as she lay curled on the ground, one wing clutching at the sword through her gut. My children will avenge me, beast, they are loyal. We'll see. He grabbed the queen by the throat and lifted her into the air as a dozen half-harpies surrounded them, crying out their anger. If you don't back off, I will end her right now, growled Rain. What have you done to Mother? Mother, we can still save you, do not worry. What do you want, beast? Rain looked over the dozen half-harpies eyeing him warily. He held up a paw and spread his digits. For the bargain price of 5 of you to die beneath my teeth, I will let her go. The queen's eyes rounded. Rain tightened his grip, cutting off her words. No. Fuck you, wolf. Never. We will never sacrifice our own. We low minus. The one who had spoken up paused as a harpy goblin wing came down on her shoulder, then on her other shoulder. Sorry sister, but you just aren't worth much to us, you've always been weak-winged. We need mother more than we need you, she's the only one who can keep our harpy blood from becoming diluted. Wabi but minus. The two harpy goblins either side of her hauled her forward, her heels digging into the ground uselessly. And no. Sisters. Die for mother. They held her still as Rain ripped out her throat, her eyes shifting from wide-eyed fear to the relaxed visage of death. The brown-haired one on the right shivered, her eyes transfixed by Rain's bloody teeth. The one on the left spoke up. Beast, we gave you one of our own, surely this is enough, harpy gobos aren't gobos, we're worth so much more, even this one. Return our mother, be Ria's minus. The brown-haired one suddenly lunged forward, but not at Rain, instead she wrapped her wings around the one on the left and flung her into Rain's waiting jaws. Instinctively he ended her life with a snap. The rest of the harpy goblins stared at the one who had suddenly sacrificed her sister. She breathed in and out shakily. I'm not going to be one of the 5 to die. I need to live. Bedlam broke out. Sister attacked sister and the air was filled with screams and talons rending and incising flesh, flashes of blood sprayed through the air to spatter down on the green leaves of the jungle. Feathers torn from wings littered the ground and small downy feathers floated through the brawl. At last a trio of harpy goblins were forced down on the ground, their sisters pinning them. Rain was fairly sure one was already dead, and judging by the amount of blood on the ground the other two wouldn't last much longer. A bedraggled sister with flecks of red covering her face and hair lank with blood turned to Rain. You got your bargain and then some, beast, she said between heaving breaths. Blood payment has been rendered under harpy law. Give her to us and we'll let you leave. Rain pushed the queen in front of him and released her neck. Daughters, did you not see his eyes? Said the queen sadly. It was never going to end this way. Rain grabbed the hilt of the sword sticking out her lower back and heaved the queen forward. The blade protruding from her belly pierced the half-harpy in front, skewering her. The queen embraced her daughter as she screamed. The remaining 6 harpy goblins roared their fury and threw themselves on Rain, anguish disfiguring their faces. Rain backed away, his arms raised to protect his face. When an opportunity arose he grabbed at their talons and hauled one toward his mouth where he swiftly ended her. 1, 2, 3, their strength was nothing compared to the queen and their talons could not cut far into his body. The barrage of talons continued, lacerating his arms and causing the wolf to retreat through the jungle. He tripped over a root and rolled backwards, bursting unexpectedly from a tree line into a large grassy clearing. The last 2 harpies followed him, howling their mindless rage, and he grabbed them both from the air, hauling them down to the ground. Their strength faltered below his own and he held them in place while one by one tearing out their throats. Chapter 27. Rain stumbled to his feet exhausted, each footstep leaving a blood-red mark in the grass. He turned around looking for enemies but none appeared. He was alone. Looking up at the domed cavern ceiling overhead he realized he must be in the center of the cavern. It seemed the jungle stopped at the center and was replaced by a wide field of grass. The clearing did not appear uninhabited. A cluster of goblin tents was at one end verging on the tree line. At the other end was a long barn-like building crudely made from wood. In the center was a cluster of wooden buildings. He began walking toward the buildings in the center. He figured if he wanted to kill the leader of the tribe then now would likely be a good time, as it seemed that what remained of the goblins and half-goblins were out hunting for him in the jungle. As he neared he began to hear voices. A deeper voice along with a scratchy female voice that sounded somehow unnatural and awkward. He slunk up to one of the buildings leaving a trail of blood in his wake and ducked to peek through one of the glassless windows. A back faced him, a very muscular back, one leaning back in a chair. 5 uneven horns protruded from its head, bull horns. A horse-like mane of hair ran down its neck. Rain didn't have any difficulty recognizing a minotaur when he saw one, having killed and eaten one recently, though the mutated horns and angular ears poking from the sides of its head were new. This creature, you say it came from some lake a few floors down? Said the goblin minotaur with a predictably deep voice. Yes. The ancestral memories are fragmented but the description fits, and I know no other creature which might pass as it. I know something terrible was done at that lake. I know the ancestors dreaded a return of what was put down there, said the scratchy female voice. Rain couldn't see much else due to the angle, so the owner of the voice was out of view. It seems unlikely a monster would return from over 1,000 years ago, still it is just another monster, nothing to worry about. My witch's memories say otherwise. They feared these things like no other, especially their ruler, their king. This may sound insane and beyond belief to you, and I would not speak of this knowledge to any other, but to stop these things monsters and levelers fought together on the same side. Bullshit. That did not happen. Not possible. It's true, though it is hard to imagine a situation desperate enough where that would have come about. Just speaking of such a thing would anger any monster who heard it in this era, so I will not repeat this outside of this room. Faulty memories, it's happened before, not everything survives the generations intact. The most traumatic memories do, and this one scarred generations of gobos. Fine. I'll humor you. We have a resurrected, or whatever, monster from an age past running around in our cavern. Theoretically, it's pretty strong. Isn't this a good thing? I don't follow. The Minotaur leant forward. It's obvious, isn't it? We want strong monsters to grow our power. We capture this beast and have the regular gobos breed with it. They fill it with halves or themselves pop out a few halves, and they're on our side. Hell, if it's as scary as you make it out to be, then we'll be unstoppable. We'll be able to take over the dungeon, and then we can conquer the surface. It can all be ours, we can take everything. The scratchy voice hissed in annoyance. We can barely keep what we have. Look what happened to the Harpy Queen. She escaped and lives on the cavern ceiling, forming her own faction with her daughters, a perpetual thorn in our side, forever demanding more influence. A monster like this would surely be uncontrollable, and its spawn chaotic. Far from ideal. You don't know that. Our cave beer half-breeds are placid, unless you do something to anger them, but no one's stupid enough to do such a thing. Besides, if it turns out to be a problem, we can always just kill them. Remember the slime gobbo disaster? Same thing. Yes, I remember, and if I ever see a tentacle again, it will be too soon. There was a rustling sound of movement. This thing is not like other monsters, Cairn. It is something from a more savage era when rivers of blood were the norm. A time when few tribal monsters could speak, as the ancestral memories were not as developed as they are today. We would likely be doing the dungeon, no, the world, a service by ensuring it does not leave our cavern alive. Fuck the world. This is an opportunity to seize power like never before. Hell, I'll fuck a few kids into it myself if it's female. I've had enough of this idiotic Minotaur bravado. There was a scuttling tapping noise and the scrape of a door. Rain slunk around the building and hid behind a poorly made crate. He peeked over the top as the front door opened. A long black spike crept from the door and hooked around it. It took a moment for Rain to realize he was looking at a gargantuan spider leg as several more thin legs slipped through the door, and then the body of the creature, a terrifying spider with the top half of a goblin sticking up where its head might have been. The monster needed to turn its body at an angle to fit its bulbous black abdomen through the door, and even then it was a struggle. It got stuck and had to tug itself free. Standing on the grass, the bottom of her spider torso must have been 6 foot off the ground, such was her size. Behind her, the half-minotaur ducked through the door. His dark green fur slashed with black rippled over thick slabs of muscle as he moved, heavy hooves impacting the ground. His face was more squashed than a minotaur, with pointier teeth and long knife ears and orange eyes. The twisted crown of horns on his head gave Rain pause, so did the fact he was massive, standing 8 foot tall, larger than any minotaur Rain had seen before. Not just a goblin minotaur, he thought. An evolved hobgoblin minotaur. The spider goblin turned to Cairn. I'm going to cast a locating spell to see if I can pinpoint the creature, and then we are going to gather our strongest, even the Harpy Queen if she can be convinced, and we are going to destroy this intruder into our tribe's home. He sneered but remained silent. The half-spider rolled her fingers and stretched her wrists before cracking her knuckles and forming a complicated sequence of seals with her hands. A large intricate symbol on her spider abdomen began to glow blue, and mist started to spill from it. She focused, deep in concentration. Cairn scratched his balls through his loincloth. He peered around, bored. He yawned. He paused mid-yawn, however, when his eyes alighted on a trail of red through the grass that led to the building they had just come from. He blinked and furrowed his brow. Hey. Remain quiet, this is not an easy spell and far from my usual area of expertise. I almost missed that leveler with it this morning. I need to focus. Hey, I see red. What? I see red on the grass. The spider goblin paused and the mist began to dissipate. She scowled. Just go look into it. I'm losing my spell with your blabbering. The spider goblin closed her eyes and the mist resurged. Karen sighed and strolled off to investigate. Rain backed away from the crate and returned to behind the building. He looked up. The building was crude, but it did have a roof. He set his claws in the uneven wooden planking and hauled himself up until he clambered atop. Crouched low, he made his way across the wooden tiles until he could peer down. The Minotaur was looking at the bloody grass while vaguely scratching his chin. Curious. His eyes tracked the red, following it until they came to the window Rain had hid by to listen in on them. Cairn. It's here. The damn thing is here. Cried a scratchy voice, causing Cairn's eyes to widen. Too late. Rain dropped from the roof like winged death, his claws outstretched and maw open, ready to bite down on the half-Minotaur's neck. At the last possible moment, the Minotaur caught sight of Rain's shadow and twisted his head aside. Rain's teeth latched onto his shoulder. The Minotaur's arm swept up before he could bite deep and crashed into him. Rain was flung away from the Minotaur with a flap of his skin hanging from his front teeth and went tumbling across the grass. The Minotaur roared his pain and jerked around to see Rain picking himself up. Blood washed down his shoulder. That was good, you almost got me. I can see why you've survived with a nasty bite like that. You just need to get up close and bam. The Minotaur closed his thick-fingered fist in front of his chest. Unsuspecting prey would fall like flies. Rain grinned. Suspecting too. Too bad you're not female. I'd have liked to have some kids with teeth like that. I'll still enjoy breaking you in for the regular gobos, however. I'll pass, thanks. You won't get a choice in the matter. You won't be the first monster I've caught for the tribe, nor will you be the last. Rain snorted. You threaten, but I will devour you. Cairn's nose wrinkled in annoyance. The spider goblin scuttled around the building at this point and came to a stop, seeing Rain. A worried look crossed her face. Listen, thing that came from the lake, you haven't fought anything like me before, boasted Cairn. We'll see. Your Harpy Queen talked big too, but she's dead now. Cairn blinked at him and turned to the spider goblin. She grit her teeth. I do not think he is lying. Cairn turned back to him with a snarl. You'll regret that. The spider goblin began to make seals with her hands and violet fire sparked between her fingers, then a large 3-foot-wide violet fireball bloomed above her glowing spider abdomen and hovered in place. Rain felt a shiver go up his spine seeing the fire. Magic fire. Rain hated magic fire. He almost lunged at the spider goblin but was barely able to control himself. He could feel the memories of his death crawling up his back, slithering around his neck. His breathing accelerated. Burn him up, Lazia, said Cairn, unbuckling a pair of hatchets from his belt. They were really broad-bladed axes, but they appeared as hatchets in his meaty hands. Wiser words you have never spoken, said Lazia as she flung her hands forward. A dozen fist-sized fireballs sprung from her fingers and zipped through the air. Rain threw himself out the way as they fut shot one by one into the grass, sending sprays of dirt into the air. The fireballs didn't stop and Rain had to scramble out of the way as the stream chased him. Cairn bellowed and charged toward him with hatchets raised. Rain dove and angled himself so that the Minotaur was between himself and the spider and blocking her aim. Then he raced toward him. He dove down below the angle of the hatchets and his teeth shot toward the Minotaur's shin, aiming to maim him. The Minotaur saw this, however, and fell forward, snatching his leg up into the air and away from the slicing teeth. He rolled when he hit the ground and smoothly leapt to his feet, facing Rain, who was once again being bombarded, only for a moment however, as Rain lunged toward Cairn once more. This time Cairn did not have momentum and he crossed his hatchets to block the hurtling wolf. Rain thrust his paws forward, intending to rip the hatchets from the Minotaur's grip. His paws wrapped around the shafts just below the blades and he twisted back, torquing into the ground and heaving his weight into them. The Minotaur's hoof slid across the grass, but then he stabilized and heaved backwards, pulling Rain off his feet to his surprise. Cairn roared and flung him to the ground, where a hatchet whipped down to take Rain in the chest. Rain rolled to the side, just avoiding it, and reached for the Minotaur's hooves to drag them into range of his teeth, but the Minotaur, predicting this, danced away, giving the spider goblin line of sight. Fire rained down as Lazia unleashed and Rain's vision was filled with violet. He scrambled out of the way, but one of the fist-sized fireballs landed on his lower leg in the same spot that Myra had hit him in his previous life. He howled in pain and rolled across the grass, desperately trying to slap the fire out. At last the fire died, but not in his mind. He could still see it, Myra's fire. He looked at the spider goblin and he saw Myra. It was happening again. No, not like this. His heart rate spiked and his lips raised in a savage snarl that shifted into a deep bone-shaking roar that sent the grass around him trembling and the air rippling. He moved. Feet cratered the earth as he exploded forward, yellow eyes locked on to the spider goblin who was backing away fearfully. Cairn. Stop him. Stop him. She spun her hands, frantically spitting out fireballs as she formed a fiery net. Cairn rushed forward, his hoofs stomping the grass flat, but he was too slow and Rain outpaced him, dashing straight into the oncoming fireballs, shifting and slipping around them ever onward. The spider goblin suddenly threw up her hands and a massive spectacular net of fire bloomed in front of her, forming a wall between her and Rain. Unfortunately for her, the net formed slightly above the ground. She hurried to manipulate it downward, but Rain threw himself down and slid underneath, his momentum carrying him through. He scrambled to his feet and turned on the spider who was skittishly backing away. See Cairn. Rain dived under the spider as she moved her hands back to throw more fire and he disappeared from her line of sight. She yelped and scuttled back, lifting her body high to try to avoid the wolf. Crack snap. She looked to her side wide-eyed and trembling as one of her legs fell to the ground, having been bitten from her body. Burn. Burn, damn you. She raised her hands into the air and the huge fireball floating above her abdomen exploded, washing over her in a wave of violet fire. Solar flares of violet licked off her body as she was engulfed, lashing between her legs and boiling the air. The air sizzled, but the spider goblin was unharmed. She swung her head about, desperately looking to see if she had hit Rain as the last of the violet fire whisked away. Crack snap. She screamed as another of her legs fell to the ground. Cairn bellowed and charged through the dwindling net of fire that still hung in the air, burning himself in the process. Furious, the Minotaur rushed to the spider, his hatchets raised. Rain ducked behind her as he moved, trying to get a clear strike. Rain didn't give him one and danced between her legs as the Minotaur circled Lazia in growing frustration. Rain suddenly grabbed one of the spider's legs and heaved, pulling her away from the Minotaur and towards the building. Cairn bellowed again and rushed around to strike at him. Rain used the time it took from him to circle him to place his teeth once more on one of the spider's legs. The Minotaur snarled and in desperation threw one of his hatchets. The steel hurtled through the air like a meteor toward Rain's head. Rain flinched back, surprised by the force and accuracy of the throw, barely avoiding it. The hatchet missed Rain and smashed into Lazia's leg. Snap! Lazia screamed as her leg broke and her legs went out from under her. She fell. Unfortunately for Rain, he was ducking back underneath at the same time and the entire weight of the spider goblin came crashing down on him. He slammed into the ground flat with a woof of breath, the weight of her resting on his back. He struggled to get free but could do nothing as heavy Minotaur hooves stomped toward his head. Got you, you piece of shit. A massive meaty hand came down on his neck and he found himself being forcefully dragged from beneath the spider. He was hauled up into the air and a pair of arms wrapped around his chest, straitjacketing him to Cairn's torso. The Minotaur's arms were long enough that he could still grip Rain's neck with one hand while keeping his arms pinned. Rain struggled but found that with leverage the Minotaur's strength far outstripped the cave bear's. He was trapped as solidly as though he were wrapped in bands of steel. Lazia climbed to her feet with difficulty, breathing hard. You okay, Lazia? No, I'm not fucking okay. My legs. My beautiful legs. You'll get over it. You got spares. The spider goblin made a strangled scream. That thing, that hateful thing, that thing needs to die. She lifted up a hand and it was engulfed with violet fire. Now hold on. I've caught it, see? Literally all we need are collars and chains from the breeding pens and we have a new breeding stud. Fuck your stupid plan to make kids with this fucking horror Cairn. It's not stupid. Don't you see the potential, Lazia? Just think of the potential. We could conquer the dungeon. Monsters could rule the surface. The spider took a step forward and her other hand ignited as well. Do I look like I'm thinking about goddamned potential? No, but come on, Laz, I jumped through your own fire for you. The spider stepped forward and Rain snarled as the fire came nearer, struggling with all his might. And then you broke one of my legs. That was an accident. Rain growled and snapped at the air, pushing himself to the limit, but Cairn's grip was unwavering. I'm going to kill it, Cairn. Hold it still. Cairn backed away as Lazia came on. No. It's mine. I caught it. Let me kill it. Lazia lunged forward and Rain saw only Myra's fire. He let out a snarling, furious roar unlike any before. It rose up deep from within himself, deeper, as though it came from his very soul, a throbbing bass rumble that surged up like distant thunder. Rain's muscles strained against his binds, his head drew back and then thrust forward, maw yawning wide, and the sound physically collided with the air as it was unleashed, the bone-vibrating shock reverberation causing the air to shimmer outward in a shockwave, strings of blood and drool flung from his teeth as his jaws shuddered wider. The roar built on itself, growing and booming. All grass in every direction was blown flat as waves of limitless bass flooded forth. The ground trembled and quaked beneath Karen's hooves as though the very earth was afraid. But it didn't stop, no, it just became louder. Trees shifted in the distance, the fire in Lazia's hands was blown away, stones and dust began to drop from the cavern ceiling far above, the buildings they stood by shifted and creaked, wooden tiles crashing to the ground as they were shaken loose. And then it became even louder. Karen could see Lazia's lips moving but no voice reached him. It was all he could do to hold onto the wolf as it released a staggering, ear-numbing ripsnarl roar. Lazia was screaming silently at him now, but his sight was starting to go dark around the edges. He blinked and felt fluid run from his eyes. No, not just his eyes, his ears were running too, and his nose and mouth. He licked his lips, the iron taste of blood. The vibrations were so strong now that he could barely breathe. He could feel his heart struggling to beat under the pressure waves. Oh, was it the wolf? Everything was going dark. His fingers slipped from around the beast. Why did he do that? Why did he fall to his knees? Why was the dark ground rushing up toward him? Karen slumped to the ground with blood pouring from every orifice as the roar came to an end. Chapter 28. In the aftermath, Rain's ears were filled with nothing but high-pitched ringing. His jaw and throat ached. He was stunned enough by his own roar that it took him a moment to realize that the spider goblin was drunkenly moving toward him, holding up Karen's axe over her head. Blood ran from her nose and ears, but she was still mobile. He struggled to move his body properly, everything felt sluggish and unresponsive. He held up his arms pitifully and the axe came down. By chance she stumbled forward as she swung and the head of the axe flew over the top of his feeble defense, leaving Rain to catch the haft on his arms. Crazed eyes looked back at him, Lazia's mouth opened in a silent scream of rage, revealing strange spider-like mandibles amongst fine white needle-like teeth. Rain grabbed the axe and hauled down on it at the same time as he pushed upward. He smashed his forehead into Lazia's face, breaking her nose with a burst of blood. She let go of the axe. This seemed to knock her free of her mindless rage, and fear momentarily crossed her gaze. Then, however, she seemed to commit herself to her chosen path, her jaw clenching in hard-hearted determination. Her hands snapped out multiple seals and glowing markings washed across her entire body. Violet fire bloomed above her abdomen once more, but this time it did not stop coalescing and the ball of fire continued to grow. 3 foot, 5 foot, 7 foot across, the heat from the vast ball of fire was enough to scorch the grass. Rain shielded his eyes from the growing brightness, then, finally recovering some basic rationality, he began to step away, wary of the spider's intent. The spider matched him and came on. Rain turned tail and fled as solar flares of violet fire began to jump from the 15-foot-wide fireball. It radiated so much heat he could feel it sear his back. The spider chased after him, fingers swiftly dancing and forming ever more seals. Rain gripped the axe from where he had been hugging it to his chest out of sight and suddenly, without warning, twisted mid-bound, his arm whipping around as he swung his all into it. The axe flung from his paw like a bolt from a crossbow and tore through the air. But Lazia was ready. A solid violet disc conjuring into place in front of her chest to block the thrown axe. Unfortunately for her, Rain wasn't aiming at her body. The axe came down on one of her legs and snapped it like a twig. Rain caught sight of a moment of open dismay on the spider's face before she came down hard. She crashed to the ground top half first and her abdomen rose up, fireball in tow, peaked, then came plummeting down to earth like a meteor. Rain desperately flung himself away, but he was still picked up and thrown by the blast like a child's toy to be sent bouncing and rolling across the grass. He came to a halt in a heap. Several minutes passed with him unmoving. Then with a groan he slowly lifted his head. All that was left of Lazia was a crater in the ground. Crazy suicidal goblin. Now I can't eat you. With difficulty, he sat up. Every part of him ached. Bruises and cuts felt like they'd been uniformly patterned over his body. Ow mers. Rain looked around to see Opal twisting a finger in her ear. I can't hear you, hold on. Rain cracked his jaw and poked at his own ears. The ringing sound dropped off a little. I said, ow my ears. I think you scared the snot out of every gobbo in the damned cavern. First that, Whatever that roar was, and then kabooming Spidey. She was going to blow herself up no matter what I did. She was a, witch. Goblin witches don't seem to like me very much. And the roar. I thought the cavern was going to come down for a moment there. Rain shrugged. I'm not sure, I didn't know I was capable of such a thing. Opal tapped at her chin. Maybe it has something to do with growing. A bigger body, outsized strength, and, well, a bigger roar. It was a little more than just a bigger roar. I straight up killed a minotaur with my voice alone. I think if the witch had been on top of me as well, she wouldn't have survived either. I'll try think up some way to use that, but right now I'm going to make you hate me. Rain tilted his head to the side and blinked. Why's that? What do you think the entire tribe is doing right now that you've thoroughly spooked them all with all that noise and ground trembling? Yep, that's right. They're all fleeing toward the exits. Rain groaned and rubbed a paw over his face. Meaning that they will be trying to figure out how to get past the obstacles we made and will sooner or later succeed. Opal simply stood there and with her hands behind her back and rocking on her heels excitably. Can't let food escape. She grinned. Coming. Rain pressed his lips together in a line but rolled to his feet. The goblin led him into the jungle and they made their way back to the main entrance of the cavern. It quickly became clear that as predicted the entire remaining population of the tribe was trying to escape at once. A crowd was fighting at the entrance, unable to keep order long enough to figure out how to move the stone disc and simply throwing themselves at it and shouting their frustration. A pile of them had built up, standing on each other to haul on the wooden pegs that ran along the part of the wheel. Unfortunately for them, they had not noticed the stone wedge Rain had placed below, so their efforts were wasted and in fact made it impossible for the few goblins who had noticed the problem to remove it, leaving them helpless. There were a number of human goblins mixed in the crowd of regular goblins as well as 3 dire dog goblins. As the pair watched, cohesion started to break down. The human goblins lost their temper and started laying into the regular goblins with swords and clubs. The dire dog goblins, seeing this, quickly joined in. This seemed to push the terrified regular goblins beyond all reason and weapons were unslung and used with abandon. They swarmed the surprised half-goblins and through sheer dint of numbers overwhelmed them, though not without heavy losses. This would have happened sooner or later. This whole tribe was a tinder trap waiting to ignite and go up in flames, said Opal. The ones in charge of all this had no idea what they were sitting on. A dozen regular goblins survived, many of them injured, so when Rain pushed aside the foliage and stepped into their midst, it was not a terribly difficult fight. However, a couple did still manage to escape into the jungle. Opal drew her cutlass and stalked after them. Rain went on to the exit he had blocked with a tree but found no goblins near and the tree untouched. When he came to the next exit, however, he found a pair of lamia frantically trying to remove stones from the hole they had filled. Unfortunately for them, they were inside the partially cleared hole and had no way to escape, so that when Rain dropped on them they could do nothing but scream. He climbed out of the hole a little more bloody than before and moved on to the last escape tunnel. Unsurprisingly, it was still blocked as the cave bear goblin he had dragged into it was massive and impossible to move. More surprising, however, was a second injured cave bear goblin surrounded by the remains of maybe 24 regular goblins which had been smashed and sliced underfoot and claw in what had clearly been a desperate fight. The cave bear goblin hadn't escaped unscathed. The goblins may have been weak, but that hadn't prevented them from exacting a heavy toll. There were only bloody pits where the cave bear goblin's eyes had once been. Rain could only guess what had led to the fight, but judging by the footprints around the hole, the new cave bear goblin had tried and failed to remove the body blocking it prior to the fight. It snuffed the air as Rain neared, ears twitching, trying to locate him. He didn't give it a chance and leapt on its back and bit down. Then again, and then again. The cave bear died with barely a whimper and Rain had to take a moment to realize he had started eating it. He reluctantly managed to pull his jaws away. His stomach growled painfully in protest. He was starting to lose himself to instinct. Biting so many monsters without actually eating them was sending his monstrous animal hunger into overdrive, having an effect on him he wasn't sure he could control, making him act irrationally. Rain slipped off the cave bear's back to the ground with a sigh. He looked back at the body and frowned, then after a moment shook his head. One last place to check. He rubbed the back of his paw past his lips, drool coming with it. Gods, I feel hungry enough to eat a tribe, or 3. He reappeared back in the central clearing in which he had fought Cairn and Lazia. First he checked the goblin tents, but as he had assumed they were currently unoccupied. Then he came to the crude wooden buildings in the center. Apart from the main one, they seemed to contain only basic supplies, not of immediate concern. The last building of the clearing lay at the opposite end. A long crude wooden building much larger than the others. Rain made his way over to it. He diverted toward one end as a flash of movement caught his attention. He rounded the end and blinked in surprise. A naked person stood there, her hands chained above her head to a tall wooden post. She had the body and face of an elf, partly. Her legs were like that of some kind of bipedal sheep species, with black cloven hooves and soft and puffy white cloud-like sheep fluff. The sheep-like legs began about 6 inches down her leg from her hip, transitioning from pale skin to fluff with a particularly large puff of fluff like the tops of stockings. A small square of cloud-like fluff sat above her mons and another large burst of cloud-like fluff at the top of her sternum between her breasts. Her arms were encased in a sheath of white from nearly the top of her biceps to her wrists, each end capped with a puff of white. It gave the impression she was wearing clothes-fitting white sleeves with a cloud of fluff at each end. Voluminous hair framed her head, her thick white locks framing her face. She was short for an elf at 5 foot 6 inches. A pair of blue eyes looked back at him from a worried but resolute elfin face. "You, what are you?" "Monster. Leveler." Rain looked down at his blood-soaked body. "Take a wild guess." The elf sheep paled. Oh. I suppose you aren't here to rescue me then." "No, I'm here to kill everything in this cavern." "Hold on a moment, you can't be serious." "I'm not part of this tribe. I only just got here." Rain tilted his head to his side. "You aren't one of the breeding stock they use to make half-goblins?" She blushed. "No, I am most certainly not. I was caught by that wretched witch spider thing only this morning. I have nothing to do with this, so you can't kill me. I'm not part of whatever grudge you have against the goblins." "Whoever said I have a grudge? Then why are you doing this?" Rain showed his teeth. "Because I want to eat you all." He took a step closer. The elf sheep's eyes rounded. "What kind of wait? Look, you're clearly sapient and intelligent. Let's just talk this out for a sec." I'm listening." "You don't need to kill me. I'm just a low leveler, a scrub, level 14, I've barely begun, totally not worth it." "Oh, I'd bet you taste pretty good though." "Why no?" "Listen, there's something in that barn you need me for." "And what would that be?" "I'll show you. Just unchain me." Rain narrowed his eyes. "You want me to let you go free? For nothing? Do you think I'm a fool?" She raised her chin. "I'm serious, take me inside. You will need my help, it's not something you will want to deal with on your own." Rain stepped forward abruptly and slammed a paw onto the post above her head, causing it to shudder. He was significantly taller than the elf sheep and he towered over her. He snarled as he spoke. "I need nothing from you but your body. You do not get to tell me what I will or will not do. I'm not afraid of you. You great brute." She gave him such a look of confident defiance that he was momentarily taken aback. "I know what I'm about. Your intimidation does not work on me, I've faced down worse than you." Rain gave her a curious look. "You seem to genuinely believe that, but..." He stepped back and his gaze ran down her body to where her knees were turned inward and trembling like leaves in the wind. A line of fluid ran from her crotch to splatter on the ground. The elf sheep followed his gaze and seemed to realize that she was openly wetting herself. Oh, that's not me. I'm not doing this." She blushed furiously as liquid continued to loudly hit the ground. "You pretty clearly are." "No. This is my sheep half. I gods, it must be some kind of inherited physical fear of whatever species you are. I swear I'm not wetting myself, it's my body reacting on its own. I am not afraid of you." Rain snorted, then let out a small laugh, then a larger one. "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. It's true. I swear. It happens sometimes, it's like ancestral memory, like tribal monsters." Rain paused. "Do you have any idea what species of monster I am?" The elf sheep blinked. No. Neither do I. I do know that my kind scared the shit out of a lot of monsters and levelers a long time ago though." "Maybe there is something to what you are saying." "Wait, how do you not know what kind of monster you are?" "Because I am the only one of my kind. I've never met or heard of another like me." "Well, okay, but you still definitely need me." Rain pondered her words. He wasn't impressed with this elf sheep's promises. but he had to admit he found her half fear, half bravery intriguing. I don't think so, but I'd like to see where you're going with this. He grabbed the chain that rose above her hands and yanked it down. The iron pin that it was attached to came free from the wooden post with a shower of splinters and broken wood. The elf sheep began to sink down as her legs gave out, but with a yelp she managed to awkwardly crab walk by the puddle she'd made. She looked up at him from a crouching position. This has never happened before. I disassociate myself from my legs. You can't do that. They're still your legs. Yes, I can. I declare my legs persona non grata. Rain opened his mouth then closed it again, unsure what to say to that. Instead he pulled up on the chain, pulling her arms into the air and lifting her up to standing. Her legs wobbled dangerously but she managed to keep upright. After a moment Rain let her stand unaided. He still kept the chain hanging in his paw however. Show me what you want to show me. It had better be good or you'll find yourself becoming intimately familiar with my teeth. The elf sheep visibly gulped and began shakily walking toward the entrance. Rain noted as she turned that above the huge fluffy ball that was her tail she had several welts across her back as though she had been whipped, the reason for being tied up outside made clear. They passed beneath the entrance and into the shadowy interior of the breeding pens. Chapter 29. Inside the breeding pens dried grasses covered the ground and the air stunk of musk. Muffled voices hidden by wooden walls broke the silence. They paused at the corner of the first wall and Rain poked his head around. A pair of goblins were arguing beside some kind of lumpy blanketed table. It's my turn. Your turn? This is the end of the tribe. If we're all gonna die I want to go out riding dick. What? That's ridiculous. I'm on the schedule for today. Look, my mark is on the schedule. It's clear that you haven't a leg to stand on. He's all mine. Fuck the schedule and fuck you. The goblin punched the other goblin in the eye. She went reeling and sat down with a thump. You bitch, said the goblin, rubbing her eye. The goblin who had thrown the punch was no longer looking in her direction however and was pulling aside the sheet. A pair of stumps, legs that had been severed at the knee, were revealed as well as a wrapping of chains. Then as she pulled the sheet back further a loincloth. She licked her lips and crawled up on top of the table. A growl from behind made her freeze up and slowly turn around. Her eyes glanced over the corpse of the punched goblin lying on the ground and then up to the massive blood-covered black wolf monster. Hey. There. Don't suppose you'd let me have a little fun before you get me? Maybe. No. A paw flashed out and she was dragged into his jaws with a squeal of fear, swiftly ending her life. Rain tugged on the chain and the elf sheep who had been holding onto the wall to keep herself up whimpered and tottered after him. Her entire lower body was trembling uncontrollably now and she looked near ready to keel over. Rain walked to the far end of the table and pulled back the sheet. A pure-blood minotaur's head was revealed, his head encased in a metal frame and his jaw forced open with a metal bar. Scars marred his face and one of his eyes was missing. The good eye looked up at Rain, pleading. Rain tilted his head to the side. He didn't think anyone about to die by his jaws had ever given him that look before. He gave the minotaur what he wanted and ripped out his throat. The look of sheer peace that crossed the minotaur's face gave Rain a moment of pause. It was incongruous with his experience and it bothered him. Prey normally did not want to die like this. The elf sheep appeared at his side. He was a minotaur, one of the most prideful species. I think this must have been a hell tailored to his worst nightmares, poor guy. I assume he tried to escape more than once going by the wounds. Most likely. Some species do much worse than others in captivity, some better. This tribe should have been exterminated a long time ago, if only the local town ranker wasn't a lazy asshole. I know of him. He is on my list. What list is that? The list where they get eaten bit by bit while still alive. The elf sheep shuddered and gave him a wary glance. Is this what you wanted to show me? Because it's not enough to save your life. And no, this is something else. I didn't know about this guy or what was being done to him. What I wanted to show you is further in, I think. I hope. Know with absolute certainty to be 100% factual. I have supreme confidence that it is the case with zero doubt whatsoever that it is anything other than what I know to be true. Rain squinted at the nervous-looking elf sheep. Then tugged on her chains and they passed through to the next partition. A pair of human women were curled up in the piles of dry grass. Rain realized that this was what the elf sheep had wanted to show him for they were both clearly pregnant. The pair looked up at him with fearful eyes and scrambled back. The elf sheep stepped forward. It's okay now, everything's going to be fine. She turned on Rain with a quietly confident look. See, told you, it's something you wouldn't want to deal with. Why? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? You're not going to eat pregnant people. Rain furrowed his brow in thought. The elf sheep blinked and then worry crossed her face. Why you aren't or why you? Rain knew he was now a monster and no longer human. It was just a fact, not that he had led a particularly normal human life. Still, he remained at his core human even if he was now drenched in so much blood. This feels like a line that human me really doesn't want to cross. I don't want to cross it either, but I'm just so hungry, so painfully hungry, and they are just there, but they're not like bloodthirsty monsters, or even regular callous and cruel levelers, or the already dead. This is. Conflicting emotions and powerful instincts racked his mind and he worried the problem. He could practically hear his animalistic hunger roaring in his ear telling him to eat. Eat. Eat the prey. Hey, hold on, there's another reason. Rain looked up and blinked. There is. Yes. There was an old fisherman who lived by a lake. What? Jay, just listen. The old fisherman fished every day, he fished and fished. And he ate every fish that he caught. Now the old fisherman had a brother who lived by a different lake. That fisherman did not eat all of the fish he caught and instead threw back the pregnant fish and the young fish. One day the first fisherman went to the lake and fished and found that he did not catch anything. He put his head below the water and found that the lake was empty of fish. He then starved to death while his brother lived on because the fish in his lake kept making more fish. So, you see, you need to let some fish go to keep fishing in the long run. Or I could go to the brother's lake and eat him and then eat his fish. I don't think fishermen eat other fishermen normally. Fishermen eat fish, not other fishermen. It's a metaphor, She pointed at the pregnant humans. They're fish, see, and the dungeon is the lake. He abruptly strode toward the humans and crouched down in front of them. They obviously freaked out and tried to scramble away, but his paw came out and clamped down on one's wrist like a vice. He dragged her toward him. Fish. She's fish. You can't eat her. Sustainable fishing. Rain brought her hand up to his mouth. The pregnant woman was hysterically bawling her eyes out by this point. Rain paused. Fish. Fine. He dropped her hand and she scrambled back into the pile of dried grass. The elf sheep let out a desperately relieved sigh of relief. Rain wasn't actually sure whether the morality of it or the consideration for sustainable fishing had let him overcome his currently screaming visceral hunger. Maybe the latter had allowed the former, he couldn't say. Still, this felt like a turning point in better controlling himself, one where he could have gone down a different path. The elf sheep had led him here. As if remembering something, he suddenly stood up and turned back to her. You got what you wanted, but you seem to be forgetting something. I am. You are clearly not pregnant. His eyes came to rest on her flat stomach. She blushed once more. That's something I was getting to. Hold on. She said as Rain took a step toward her and she quailed, her legs nearly buckling under her. I'm not pregnant, but you need me still. No, I do not. What do you think is going to happen to these fish? I do not care. Sustainable fishing. Sustainable fishing. She cried as though it were a ward against him. Stop saying sustainable fishing at me. It's true though. Just letting them go in the middle of the dungeon is not that. They wouldn't last 5 seconds out there. Without the tribe protecting them, they are all dead. Rain glared at her. That is annoyingly true. What of it? Well, I'm glad you asked. She gave him a winning smile and pointed at her chest with her thumb. Expert danger navigator and avoider of monsters, well-renowned saver of persons and items. I am your best bet, and best value for rescuing such things from places of peril as I have the legendary and famed rescuer class. My prices are quite reasonable and I have excellent reviews. You expect me to pay you to take food away? Oh no. Sorry, force of habit, this will of course be pro bono. Avoider of monsters? I don't think you are doing particularly well at that. Hey, that's not my fault. That stupid witch had some kind of locating spell. They swarmed me before I could do anything. I saw she could do that. Well, that's not something you need to worry about any longer. There's nothing left of her but a crater in the grass. Good. Stupid spider goblin. Come on, help me break their chains. Rain watched silently as the elf sheep scooped up their chains and tried to fruitlessly pull them from where they were attached to the wall. After a moment he sighed and grabbed up the chains with one paw. With a grunt he pulled them both from the wall with a shower of splinters, then put the ends in the elf sheep's hands. Yours. Thank you, just a few more places to check now. Rain stepped toward the next stall as the elf sheep encouraged the terrified humans to their feet. They reluctantly followed, keeping the maximum distance from Rain that their chains would allow. The next stall was empty of people, although talon marks marred the walls, including a crudely made picture of a pair of wings plus a crown, below which someone had written Harpy Rain. In one corner was a shattered pair of chains, in the other was a pile of discarded clothing. The elf sheep wobbled over to this. Oh. My clothes. My precious stylish clothes. Oh, how I have missed you. She quickly snatched up a pair of shorts and wiggled into them and grabbed up a jacket and a few other things. She threw a pair of blankets at the pregnant women as Rain pulled on her chain and moved on to the next stall. He had to stop as he entered, as the stall was dominated by a very large and very pregnant pure blood lamia, a human-like upper body with red hair and a green-scaled serpentine lower body. A snake tail coiled around his stomach and pulled him forward playfully. Oh. What's this? Did the little gobbos send me a new toy to play with? They could have at least cleaned you first, tch. Though these muscles, this build, this isn't bad at all, said the lamia as she ran the tip of her tail over his body. If you don't remove your tail you're going to lose it, snake. Oh Hako. He's a spicy one. I likey. You know what I said about certain species dealing with captivity better than others? Said the elf sheep, giving Rain the side eye. Rain grabbed the lamia's tail, which was trying to fondle his rear, and threw it aside. The lamia had a significantly nicer stall than the others. An actual bed was in one corner, as well as several trays of different foods. Also, unlike the other, she had clothes, nice clothes. She was still collared and chained, however. I'm here to take you home, you don't have to stay here any longer, said the elf sheep. Ah, really? That's good, I suppose. How about a little roll around in the sack first though? No, said Rain. Ah. But we could have fun. Still no. Rain grabbed her chain and hauled it from the wall, then handed it to the elf sheep and started to make his way out, ex-prisoners in tow. What about you, sheepy? I can do things with my tail that would make your fluff frazzle and your toes curl. The elf sheep jumped as the tip of the lamia's tail ran up her leg. I am okay, thank you for the offer though. I'm on the job and that would count as fraternization in the workplace, sorry. Blake. You're no fun. Aren't you at all worried about your pregnancy? Oh, this? No, lamia have the easiest pregnancies in the world, and all the little cutie lamia gobbos that come out make it more than worth it. Said the elf sheep, her eyes drifting to Rain's blood-covered back. I'll have to say goodbye before we leave. They are so precocious and care so much for me. This really has been a wonderful experience, really broadened my horizons. I had no idea tribal monsters had become quite so civilized. Why, some of the things we experimented with in the bedroom would boggle the mind of lamia high society. I will have quite the tale to tell when I return, and some rather fun demonstrations. I already spoke to your offspring. They said they were happy to have a mother like you and wished you well but wouldn't be able to meet you. Blurted the elf sheep. Oh. That's sad, I wanted to say goodbye, pouted the lamia. It happens, said the elf sheep soothingly. Sometimes stuff comes up. Don't worry though, I'm sure they will keep you in their hearts, and you can always send them a letter or something. You think so? They emerged back into the light of the cavern and began walking through the grassy clearing. As they did so, a red-scaled kobold emerged from the tree line, dragging a goblin body by the arms. He pulled it across the grass and put it by a growing collection of goblins. As of yet there were no lamia goblins visible, to the elf sheep's relief. I didn't think you were serious about eating them all. I like eating, particularly levelers. He eyed the elf sheep's body. I don't count. And hey, why don't you eat the kobold? He works for me, I doubt he's happy about it though. Opal, another, is more like my partner, a goblin. She's more ruthless than I am. She won't like that I'm letting you go, she'd want me to eat you. Partner. She wants to work with you? Very much so, and more than work. He gave her a wolfish grin. Huh. That's brave. Little bit reckless, just saying. Rain gave her a flat look. Wolves don't lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. Soon they were walking below the foliage of the tree line and they passed by several harpy goblin corpses until they passed the corpse of the queen harpy. She had survived a little while impaled on the inquisitor's sword and had dragged herself over to slump against a tree before she had expired. Oh my, I did wonder what had happened to her. She was a terrible apartment mate, you know, dreadful screeching, and she kept disemboweling her sexual partners and throwing their bits over our separating wall, said the Lamia. Terribly uptight. Some people need to learn to live a little and stop chasing shadows. She shook her head. I could have predicted an end like this, I said as much at the time. She was a monster, there's a reason levelers aren't huge fans of harpies. Yes, I know, but prejudices against tribal monsters are a real thing. Most levelers don't even consider them truly sapient. I plan on speaking in favor of some kind of outreach when I get back. I see such potential. Really, this ancestral memory of theirs is far underestimated. It changes everything. This isn't hundreds of years ago. Things are different. I can smell change on the air. Oh, I'm not so sure that will go over so well, muttered the elf sheep. Just watch, darling, I have rather a lot of influence amongst Lamia. Soon they reached the entrance and the stone disc. Many of the bodies had been moved already, but Rain still had to move one or two aside. He reached down and gripped the stone chalk holding the disc in place and with a grunt pulled it free. He then set his back and heaved. With a grinding rumble, the disc rolled to the side, revealing the entrance cavern with the path winding through its middle. Oh gods, freedom, said the elf sheep. Rain growled and stepped close to her, causing her to wilt and her legs to spasm in fear. He grabbed the chain manacling her wrists together and pulled her close. You're going back to Lynthia, meaning you'll speak to levelers. If you don't want to make it onto my list, then do not speak of me. Oh, of course not. I take client confidentiality very seriously. My lips are sealed and welded shut 100%. Rain gave her a searching look, but he couldn't tell if she was being genuine or not. He grabbed the metal bracelets on each wrist, then began to pull them apart. The short metal chain holding the bracelets together squealed as it deformed before abruptly the rings came apart with a screech, leaving her arms free to move as she pleased. She took a moment to stretch her limbs and crack her knuckles until she noticed Rain's gaze and blushed. She rushed to put on the jacket she had recovered from the breeding pens and cover up her chest. Ahem. Well, I shall be departing now. It was a terror meeting you, a pleasure. I thank you for your business and minus. Rain snarled and the elf sheep yelped and flinched away. I guess we'll be going now. Goodbye. She hurriedly pulled on the chains of the two humans in the Lamia and they shuffled after her through the entrance and wasted no time rushing and slithering down the path. Opal appeared at Rain's side. Hey, are you really just going to let food go like that? Nasty levelers even? You're just watching a load of fat juicy steaks go wandering off, you can't be serious. Sustainable fishing. What? Rain ignored the goblin and slunk from the entrance and into the nearest tree line. He made his way after the group of four, hidden from sight, not difficult as they weren't particularly fast. They eventually made their way to the exit from the cavern where the path ended. Rain watched from the shadows. Gods, that was close. I really thought I was dinner for a moment there. Fucking scary wolf thing, that monster is going to be a threat to the local town, I just know it. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if they are already aware of a monster like that. Oh, he didn't seem so bad, we're alive, aren't we? Mused the Lamia. The elf sheep turned on her. It wouldn't have been necessary had you not gone gallivanting off into the dungeon and gotten yourself kidnapped, your ladyship. You do know I came here for you, yes? Your husband paid me to come and rescue you. Oh. Well, all's well that ends well, I suppose. Back to regular life, as it were. The elf sheep worriedly eyed her clearly pregnant belly. Sure. She turned to the two humans. I will take you as far as safety, but no more, is that okay? One of them nodded furiously, but the other simply looked scared. Oh, poor things, I suppose they must have had a rougher time of it. Gobbos do need a strong hand at their worst, easier for some than others. Alright. Well, for now let's make our way back. I need you to trust me on this part and not let go. She managed to get the trio in a line behind her and got them to link hands. She grabbed the hand of the Lamia at the front. Don't be shocked, this is perfectly safe, though I'm not sure how long I can sustain it with so many, I'll need to take breaks. On 3. 1, 2, 3. The group abruptly blinked out of existence. Rain stared at the spot where they had been. Teleportation. An extremely rare power and unheard of to be viable with multiple people, it didn't really fit with how the elf sheep had gotten captured however. As he watched he noticed a shift of dust and dirt near the exit. He narrowed his eyes. Invisibility. And not just invisibility for oneself, but others too. Not only that but possibly near full invisibility if it covered the voice and removed most tracks as he suspected, he certainly couldn't hear them speaking any longer. He suddenly felt a lot more regretful letting her go. Chapter 30. Rain pushed through the foliage and emerged back into the central clearing of the half-goblin tribe's cavern. He held a dead goblin in one paw, the last to be recovered after scouring the place. Things had progressed quickly and there were many bodies laid out before him. 40 regular goblins, 16 lamia goblins, 6 human goblins, 18 harpy goblins, a minotaur goblin, a legless regular minotaur, a queen harpy, 6 dire dog goblins, and 2 cave bear goblins. It would have been 3 but Rain couldn't get the one he had pushed down a hole out of it so he had eaten it where it was. It was a lot. Easily more than twice as much meat as the Piscine army had been. Drool dripped from Rain's mouth and his lower jaw trembled in anticipation. His stomach had demanded he eat with every body he dragged to the clearing. It had been immensely difficult to hold off so long and his hunger was verging on pain. His paws curled and uncurled as his eyes ran across the last of the bodies that Opal and the kobold were busily stripping. Enough. He had waited long enough for this. Eyes alight he threw the last goblin on the pile and dived on the nearest lamia goblin. He hadn't tasted lamia before. It tasted saltier than he expected, a little bit like eel which he had sometimes stolen from the butcher's shop in his previous life. The interaction of goblin and lamia was interesting, a two-tiered flavor that left a goblin-y aftertaste. He sucked up the lamia goblin's tail into his mouth like spaghetti until he was forced to start biting off chunks and gulping it down. It didn't take long to consume his first lamia goblin. He was absolutely ravenous, and he immediately pounced on the next and then the next, barely stopping to let the growth shudder through him. He groaned involuntarily. How he had lasted this long without going mad he didn't know. He needed the feeling of growth, the feeling of power and strength welling up inside him like nothing else. Addictive didn't begin to describe it. It wasn't long before he had eaten all 10 lamia goblins and regretfully the last went into his mouth. More. He leapt on the human goblins and began to consume them. Flavor, mediocre. The mix of human and goblin taste went poorly, the flavors trying to overpower each other while at the same time canceling each other out. As a result he found them dissatisfying and it left him wanting. Still, it did not stop him from gorging himself and soon the 6 were gone. More. Next was the harpy queen. Her comparatively large body was the starter to the harpy course. Opal had taken back the inquisitor's long sword and the queen was laid out next to her daughters. Rain didn't sit on ceremony and pulled one of her thighs into his mouth. 1 bite, 2 bite, he paused. Sweet. What had started as a mild background taste became as overpowering as eating cake frosting. He struggled to adjust to it. The fact meat could taste like this was jarring to say the least. It took him a few moments but he managed to start eating again, though the overpowering sweetness made him want to gag at times. When the harpy queen was devoured at last Rain actually felt the need to wipe his tongue on his paw to help rid himself of how sweet it was. He eyed the other harpy goblins with distaste and shifted to eating a cave bear goblin for now to cleanse his palate. The smoked oaken taste of the bear was a balm to his taste buds and washed away the feeling of having just eaten a bucket of sugar. The bear was big, a massive amount of meat, and it took him a long time to get through it with multiple breaks. By the time he was nearing the end Opal had joined him, resting her hands on his chest and feeling him grow larger. He finished up the bear with a few snaps of his jaws and reluctantly turned back to the harpy goblins. Hesitantly he nibbled on a corner, then took a small bite, then a larger. He blinked in surprise. The sweetness was still there but the mixture of goblin had massively reduced it and introduced a savory element. Gleeful at finding an unexpectedly highly ranked food he chowed down on the half-harpies, quickly grinding his way through them. The last of them soon disappeared behind his jaws. More. 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 Next he moved on to the dire dog goblins. Fiery, more fiery than any kobold, much more so. The disturbing-looking creatures burned on the way down and Rain was soon breathing hard, his mouth on fire. However, despite the pain, he found that he couldn't stop himself from taking another bite. Moorish was an understatement, the spiciness made them sadistically satisfying and he couldn't help but shovel more mouthburn into his mouth. His eyes were watering by the time the last dire dog was done with. He collapsed onto the grass panting like a bellows as his stomach began to digest. Opal fell atop him and hugged his torso. He groaned as his bones began to grow once more and his stomach flattened. Opal came to rest on his muscular abdomen with a little sigh. So worth it. Spicy but so good. He looked down at her, so much smaller looking than when they'd first met. She looked up at him and smiled. I made a good call, yes. This tribe was primed for getting eaten. Yeah, you did, it was a smart idea. I feel that much bigger and I haven't even finished yet. You're starting to look so tiny. He held up one of her hands in a giant paw, just one of his paw pads was nearly the same size as her hand. She blinked up at him. Tiny. So small. I must weigh several times what you do by now. He gave her a wolfish grin. A flicker of emotion crossed Opal's face, first immense pleasure, then worry, then unhappy frustration. She bit her lip and abruptly got to her feet. She looked like she was about to say something, then shook her head and ran off. Rain looked after her in surprise. Doesn't she like that? He furrowed his brow but he couldn't think why she would suddenly feel upset. He grumbled but as his stomach growled for more he put it to the back of his mind. 40 goblins awaited his jaws and he wasn't going to let them remain outside his stomach. He ground his way through them. Compared to larger monsters, goblins were becoming trivial to eat due to his larger body, appetite, and maw. There were a lot of them but he was very hungry enough that he was eating goblin before the previous had fully digested. Gut-rounded with goblins he eventually consumed the 40th goblin. Without pause he went straight into the remaining cavebear goblin. It didn't take long and soon there was nothing left of the hill of flesh but a wide puddle of blood. He belched loud and long as it digested and the resulting growth washed over him with a satisfying stretching feeling. Of the half-goblin tribe only Cairn and what Rain assumed what was Cairn's unwilling father now remained. He could only compare it to eating 2 entire cows. He gave the minotaur he had mercy killed a moment of thought, a thank you for his body and his sympathy for what had happened to him. Rain had consumed an entire monster tribe, a large one. 92 once living beings had gone inside him and been made a part of him, fuel for his immense surging growth. Gee gods, I've never eaten so well in my life. He simply lay there for a moment, a wolf in a field of blood. There was so much blood that it covered most of the grassy clearing. After a little while, he rolled to his feet. The ground was significantly lower than he remembered, a sign of his growth. He estimated he'd hit 8 foot tall at this point, nearly a full foot of growth, which was a huge amount of increased mass, more mass than his previous 2 foot of growth combined. His sheer weight left broad paw pad footprints in the grass as he walked through it. He felt stronger too. In fact, as he came up to the building in the middle of the clearing he felt like testing his strength. He placed a paw on one of the support beams and squeezed. The wood splintered then broke beneath his grip. He then placed his paws against the building's walls and pushed. With a creaking screech the entire crude building fell over and collapsed, although, he considered, the building likely had been weakened since he'd caused a mini earthquake. He clenched and unclenched his paw in front of his eyes. He definitely felt much stronger. He knew his strength was going up disproportionately to his growth. He stepped over to one of the small central buildings and with a snarl ripped its roof off. He then pulled down its walls. Inside was a large comfortable-looking bed, the minotaur goblins he assumed. The first sight of a real bed in his new life was too much to resist and he was too exhausted to stop himself. He let out a long sigh and slumped down on top of it, the bed letting out a groan of distress from his weight. Sleep soon took him unawares and his body steadily continued to heal. Chapter 31. The kobold gripped his spear and squinted over the rough stone parapet. Furrowing his brow he nudged the kobold beside him. The second kobold startled and looked up from where he was fiddling with a metal puzzle toy. Hey, do you mind? I think I almost got it. Stop messing around with that, I think I saw something. You know what they said, keep an eye out for anything strange. The second kobold blinked at him then turned and looked over the parapet. Below the wall and across the bridge over the bottomless chasm there was an entrance to a cave system. I don't see anything. I think you're losing it. I'll make you lose it in a second if you give me any more lip. Look. The kobold jabbed out with a claw, pointing. The second kobold stared, then after a moment, a flash of red appeared from around the edge of a rock. What was that? I thought I saw a tail. That's what I thought. Some idiot kobold on the outside, didn't know why they're not coming forward though. Why would anyone be on the outside? We're in lockdown after the chief freaked. Do you know why we're in lockdown? No. Well, I heard talk. You know that half-goblin tribe down a floor? Oh yeah, they tried to raid us a while back, fat chance that was going to work with these walls. Well, apparently one of our scouts we placed to keep an eye on them threw a fit. He came back raving about some new monster he'd never seen before, said he saw it make its way inside their base, and then nothing. What do you mean nothing? I mean they're all gone. He watched and waited and the new monster left and then he crept inside their base and there was nothing left. No goblins, no half-goblins, no nothing except a massive lake of blood in the center of the cavern. Why, that's a joke, right? No, not the way I heard it. He came screaming back up here terrified out of his mind and babbling incoherently. Had to ply him with a few drinks before they could get the story straight. Once they heard it though and sent someone down to check its truth, they were real disturbed like. And here we are. Buckled up tight. Hey, hold on, looks like our friend out there is making a move. The two kobolds leaned over the parapet and stared intently as a red kobold stumbled reluctantly from behind the rock. He looked around unsure for a moment before he focused on the wall the two kobolds stood upon. The wall was across a bridge and set accessed the entrance to a large cavern. It featured a heavy iron door. The wall around the door was riddled with arrow slits from which dozens of bows were being aimed. The top of the wall bristled with kobolds carrying spears. He blinked in surprise, seemingly caught unawares by just how fearsome a defense it presented. A stick wobbled from behind the rock and poked him in the tail. The kobold jumped and seemed to collect himself. He produced a piece of paper and held it up. He squinted at it then cleared his throat. I've come with news. There's a terrifying monster on the prowl and it can dig through stone like swimming through water. My tribe, kobold tribe, has died. All dead. We underestimated the beast and it came up from under our feet. It is only I who survived. I come here now to beg you to follow me. Flee from behind your safe walls before it is too late. Come with me if you wish to live. His head turned to the side and he whispered loudly. Is that okay? I thought that went okay. The stick prodded him in the tail again. He shut his mouth and turned back to the wall. Who the fuck are you? Yelled a kobold. Me. Oh, I'm just a survivor. I've had a truly dreadful time, you would not believe it. But I hope you will listen. Heed my warning. What if he's telling the truth? Oh, shut up. He's clearly trying to get one over on us. Hey, it could be true. I swear I heard scratching in the walls last night. What if it's this monster? That was your girl tickling my balls. Fuck you, Folan, that's not funny. Whoever said I was joking? A short-lived fight broke out on the wall. Said the red kobold. Do you think any of you will be coming out? Hell no. You're probably with the monster. I am most certainly not. I would never voluntarily minus. Hey, is that a slave collar around that kobold's neck? It fucking is as well. Hey, this kobold's being puppeted. This? This is a fashion accessory. It's attached to a bloody chain. Oh, that's the necklace part. It's long because it's fashionable, of course. It's really popular on the bottom floor of the dungeon. An arrow zipped out of one of the arrow slits and struck the stone by his foot with a shower of sparks. The red kobold leapt into the air in fright. You almost shot me. Scale rot you. Do you have any idea what I've been through? My own kind having the audacity to shoot an arrow at me. Have some decency, you cretinous minus. 3 more arrows struck the stone around him and the red kobold was abruptly yanked behind the rock with a tug on his chain. An annoyed-looking goblin met his eyes. You suck at acting. No, I don't. It's just that you gave me an impossible act to follow. Nonsense, my plan was fine. Rain moved away from the wall. It was not very likely to work, Opal, let's be serious. Fee. They somehow heard about what happened. Opal scowled. Then sighed and her shoulders slumped. It's my fault. My old tribe posted scouts on the half-goblin tribe. I should have realized that other tribes would do the same. Half-goblin tribes are dangerous, so it's smart to do that. This was the 4th tribe that Opal had brought them to, and the 2nd on the floor above the half-goblin tribe. They had left the half-goblin tribe intent on finding a regular goblin tribe and repeating the same plan. Unfortunately, each time Opal brought them to one of the nearby small goblin tribes' home caverns, they found it devoid of goblins, with only a few signs that a tribe had recently been there. What had happened to the half-goblins had spooked them enough to go to ground and vanish into the dungeon's extensive cave systems. After the second time they found nothing, Opal had suggested they take the stair up a floor. They did so only to be met with another tribe's deserted cavern. Word had apparently spread far. This had led to Opal wanting to test the local kobold tribe, if unenthusiastically, as the kobolds were clearly entrenched and impossible to attack. It happens. We just need to adapt. Opal bit her lip and shivered. Rain noted her knees were slightly turned inward. He looked over the goblin carefully. He could sense something was off with her since she had run away while he ate the half-goblin tribe yesterday, but he couldn't precisely say what. She'd stayed away from him until they'd made to look for more food, and then he kept catching moments where she was looking at him. Nervously. Adapt, right? Well, we don't need to go after tribes. We can kill other monsters, monsters that hunt alone or in small packs. Monsters that aren't sapient. Larger monsters. Opal tapped her lip. Larger monsters might work. You're YA stronger now, I bet you could take down something pretty big with some tricks, and if they are big that means lots to eat. That's true, but how do we find something like that? I know of a potential place, maybe. Follow me. She tugged on the red kobold's chain and entered into the tunnel. She paused for a moment as she walked and trembled, her breath hitching. Rain narrowed his eyes, but after seeing nothing more he followed. She took them on a winding route through the caves until the ground began to be covered with the verdant moss of a new biome. Small green and white flowers speckled the walls as they went deeper. The scent of plant life filled the air and golden pollen floated lazily about them. The twisting, winding tunnel eventually came to an end and the trio exited into a vast crystal-lit cavern that was segmented into several broad tiers covered in verdant greenery, trees and grassy moss and flowers. Giant flower bulbs hung from the ceiling unbloomed. The air was full of pollen. Rain sneezed. Smells like I'm sitting in a bath full of flowers. It's blooming season. It also tends to attract a certain monster species that come here to feed. A scary monster that likes to crawl through tunnels and hunt gobbo tribes. Crawl. Well, it is big. She yanked on the kobold's chain and made her way to the edge of the tier they stood upon, a crescent moon that's inner curve dropped off as a cliff down to lower tiers. Below them, ancient gnarled trees dotted the mossy grassy ground. There, do you see it? It's called a panthera in common. Rain peered over the edge. A yellow, white, and black spotted furred creature was moving below the treetops, tall enough to push aside branches. It took Rain a minute to figure out what he was looking at. It was like a giant-sized leopard, except, like a centaur, where the head would normally be there was the upper body of a humanoid leopard. Two 6-foot-long scaled tentacle barbels emerged from its muzzle and floated behind its head. Its 4 feet and 2 hands weren't like a normal leopard's, instead transitioning from fur to scale with large eagle-like talons on each digit. Its eyes were a solid flat blue that glowed eerily in the pollen-filled air. That looks dangerous. Yeah. Don't worry though, I have something in mind. She walked along the cliff edge until she came to a large rock. She rested a palm on it. It was nearly as tall as Rain and looked immensely heavy. We're going to drop this on it. Rain eyed the rock and then eyed the panthera a fair distance away and definitely not directly below the cliff. You know I can't pick that up and throw it right. We just need to get it over here and then you push the rock over the edge. How? Opal let slip an evil grin and her eyes slid over to the kobold. Wait, why are you looking at me? What's with that look? Hold on now, said the kobold slowly backing away. Opal tossed the end of the chain to Rain and lunged at the kobold who let out a high-pitched scream. After a moment of struggle the kobold stumbled forward and Opal dodged to the side. She cackled and a foot impacted with his rear. He yelped and then to his horror he went over the cliff, his eyes wide and mouth open. He fell until with a choked gargle he hit the limit of the chain hanging 10 feet or so above the ground. He scrabbled at the collar and chain and managed to get enough of a grip to hold himself up. You asshole. You tried to hang me. He yelled up at them. Oh hush, you're a kobold as tough as an old boot. I could have died. Yes, keep making noises like that, you're attracting the panthera. I damn you. Oh, it's looking over here now. The kobold made a choked-off scream of rage and stilled himself trying to avoid attention. Too late, the panthera was prowling through the trees, shifting branches aside to peer at the dangling kobold. Its barbels twitched and snaked in the air as it narrowed its eyes. The kobold who was frozen in fright began to bounce up and down. He looked up in horror to see Rain dangling him around like bait on a hook. Stop damn you. He furiously hissed. Wiggle around more you scaly worm. Yelled down Opal with her hand cupped to the side of her mouth. Nuo! He cried, tears forming in the corner of his eyes. Opal sighed and glared at the panthera that remained watching with idle interest from the trees. Is this really not enough? Fine. She turned around and dropped her shorts and with a whip crack slapped her rear. Come and get me, you ugly shitty pussy cat. The panthera glared up at her from the trees and let out a snarl of irritation. It parted the branches and rushed straight toward the kobold, who proceeded to freak out. It's coming. Rain dropped the chain and the kobold fell with a scream. He then leapt behind the rock and rammed into it, his feet scouring the ground and his claws tearing up the earth as he torqued forward with all his strength, straining to his utmost limit. For a moment he feared he didn't have it in him to move it, but with a grinding sound it began to shift, tip, and then fall over the edge of the cliff. The rock plummeted downward, amazingly on target with the panthera, who was standing over the kobold, who had curled up on the ground in the fetal position. Unfortunately, the creature seemed far more aware of the situation than they had given credit, and when the rock began to fall, the panthera simply took a step backwards. The rock landed with a boom, spraying dirt in all directions along with a screaming kobold. The kobold's sudden flight came to an abrupt halt as the chain, now trapped under the rock, choked him off. The panthera held its arm up to protect its eyes from the dust, then once it had settled, scowled up at Rain and Opal, who were peering over the edge. Shit. What now? Nothing. Thing's too smart to fall for such basic traps, it seems. She sighed. It's fine, she said, turning away from the edge. A distant voice from below pleaded, don't leave me. I know some other place we could try. The swift sound of claw on stone came from below. Opal's eyes widened and she whipped around as a huge taloned hand came over the edge of the cliff and the panthera hauled itself up.